Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvels, Magic Master, and I have clones all over the world of magic. Chapter 21. Just now in the water tank, Gabriella and Issa witnessed the battle outside through the surveillance, and had a clearer understanding of the fighting power of Wolverine and George, and the professor said something to them. According to the professor, it is almost impossible to rush to New York in just 6 days to find news about Tony Stark and go to the Middle East for rescue. Even if it is really completed, it is also full of dangers. This is actually taking risks with the lives of Wolverine and George. Moreover, the knowledgeable professor does not recommend that the children go to Canada and let the Canadian government arrange their future lives. So after careful thinking and discussion, they decided to completely abandon the previous cooperation with the Canadian government, no longer go to the North Dakota border, but find a safe place to settle down first. Then plan how to rescue Tony Stark. Even if this plan fails in the end, as long as they work together, they can defeat those people in the experimental base who felt impossible to defeat before, and live with the children. This time, the opponent came with such a large lineup, but they were beaten and fled in embarrassment. In the past, they thought it was impossible for them to fight against the powerful Acre Gene Company alone, but now it seems that it is not impossible. As expected of Professor X, even if his abilities cannot be used, his ability to persuade people with his mouth is really incomparable to ordinary people. George's eyes lit up when he heard Gabriella's answer. He naturally agreed with Gabriella's decision to rescue Tony Stark in 6 days. Although he had the advantage of the plot, it was not as easy as the professor said. In New York, the forces are complicated, and who can guarantee that everything will go smoothly? If there is enough time to prepare, his ability development can be improved to a higher level, he can deflect sniper bullets, or learn a few more magic in Hogwarts, then the success rate will naturally be greatly improved. The key is that if he remembers correctly, Tony Stark told Pepper in the car in the movie that he was locked in the cave for more than 3 months. So normally, they don't need to be so anxious. Or if he becomes strong enough in the past few months and can get a sum of money to buy shares of Stark Group, then it seems unimportant whether to save Tony Stark or not. He saved Tony Stark for money, so that Tony Stark can protect them and live a normal life. But if they are strong enough and have money, there is no need to find Tony Stark. Because finding Tony Stark for cooperation will inevitably attract the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D., and being noticed by S.H.I.E.L.D. means being noticed by Hydra, which will lead to greater trouble. 6 days is indeed tight. Since you have made a decision, let's leave here first, find a safe place, and then discuss what to do next. George nodded to Gabriella, and then led everyone to collect the submachine guns and grenades on the bodies, and then quickly left the abandoned factory. In the current situation, as long as they leave the border now and go to a slightly farther place, it will be difficult for the people in the experimental base to reorganize their manpower to find them. Ackley Genetics can retrieve the surveillance of this small border town because it is chaotic enough here, and many things can be solved with money. But they are not regular national organizations such as S.H.I.E.L.D., FBI and CIA. On the surface, they are just businessmen, and it is impossible for their influence to spread throughout the United States, otherwise they would have been eliminated long ago. In the movie, if Donald had not used Caliban's tracking ability, it would not be so easy to find Wolverine and the Professor. And now that X-24 has been killed, before creating a new replica, it is estimated that the other party will not come to hunt them again, and they can't beat them at all. So if nothing unexpected happens, after this war, there should be no movement at the experimental base in a few months, and they can plan the next step with peace of mind. On the highway, Issa was driving a large truck in front, and George, Gabriella, Wolverine, Caliban and Professor X sat in the shed behind with the children, discussing their next destination. After a discussion, several people summarized the following points. First, the place where they are going to stay next cannot be in the city center, which will easily expose their whereabouts and attract the attention of the government and Ackley Genetics. Second, they can't stay in a place that is too remote, because whether it's the education of these children, the medicine needed by the professor, or their lives, they can't be satisfied in a too remote place. Also, it's hard to get money in a too remote place. If you don't take the route of rescuing Tony Stark, you have to get money to buy Stark shares. How to get money quickly? Normal methods will definitely not work. The so-called gold belt for murder and arson is naturally robbed from others, such as those businessmen and gangs who violate the law. There are few people in too remote places, let alone rich people, so naturally you can't get any money. Third, you can't be too far away from New York. On the one hand, they still need to continue to pay attention to Tony Stark's news trends and be ready to rescue plans at any time when they have news. On the other hand, George himself has another reason, that is, New York is a concentration of major events, especially in a few years, there will be an invasion of the Chitauri, he must be nearby for easy observation. If nothing happened, he would not have to participate. If something unexpected happened, he would have to prepare early. Otherwise, if he was practicing magic and the whole earth was destroyed, he would not be able to survive. In fact, we can go back to school, back to Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. After summarizing, Professor X suddenly said. However, Wolverine's face changed when he heard it, and he immediately rejected it. No, it's too dangerous. The government is still looking for you. Going back to school is like walking into a trap. In fact, he was not worried about the government's wanted. After all, that happened 25 years ago. They have not appeared in 25 years. The leaders of the government are probably going to change several times. The current person in charge should have thought they were dead a long time ago. What he was worried about was that when he returned to New York and returned to school, the professor would remember those deliberately sealed memories and remember that he killed all the mutants in the school. Professor X's eyes instantly shed 2 lines of tears when he heard this. Logan, you know, when you just fought, I remembered everything that happened. With the crimes I committed, I should have been dead long ago. But now, I want to live, not for myself, but for these children. I want to recover my abilities, protect the hopes of these mutants, and make up for the crimes I committed back then. At this point, Professor X choked up and continued. The brainwave room made by the beast in the basement of the school, after closing it, activate the special switch, which can close my brainwaves, so that if there is an accident and it goes out of control again, the same tragedy will not happen again. Professor, you can't be blamed for this. You didn't do it on purpose. Just like what you told us, it also applies to you. Wolverine sighed and comforted him. Back then, the reason why mutants were feared by humans was that a small number of them used their abilities to commit crimes. Most of the time, it was because when mutants began to show their abilities, they were unable to control their abilities due to their inner fear, which led to the involvement of their relatives, friends and innocent people around them. Every time these mutant children were taken to school, the professor would give them psychological counseling so that they could muster up the courage to live again. In fact, the professor was just like those children. Because of epilepsy, his brain lost control, and such a tragedy happened. He felt more pain than anyone else. I'm not a child. Since I made a mistake, I have to bear it. I can't make up for the dead, I can only find a way to make the living live better. The professor looked at the group of children in front of him and smiled again. If he hadn't seen these children and had hope in his heart, he would probably never be able to face his painful memories and would have been in a daze until his death. But Professor, so many years have passed, the school may have been taken away by the government a long time ago. At this time, George spoke up. The location of Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters is indeed good. It is located in the suburbs of the Bronx, New York. It is not too remote, but it is also a distance away from Manhattan, where many incidents occur. Even if the Chitauri invade, it will not spread there. The most important thing is that, according to his understanding, the Bronx is the most chaotic district in New York, which is located in the northernmost part of New York. It is mainly inhabited by African and Latin American descendants. If Hell's Kitchen is the most chaotic place in Manhattan, a wealthy area, then the Bronx is the most chaotic place in New York. There are all kinds of gangs, and the crime rate is one of the highest in the United States. Such a place is just right for him to make money in troubled waters. Even if he kills someone, it will not attract the attention of the government. However, after so many years, how could such a big castle still be empty? Professor X wiped his tears and explained. Although I am wanted, it is not an open one. The government does not want to make a big deal out of it, and there is not enough evidence to arrest me. So my identity is still there, and most of my assets are still there, including the castle. It's just that I can't show up, and I can't use any assets, otherwise the government can follow those clues to find and arrest me. I see. George is not clear about this, but after Professor X's explanation, he can roughly understand it. Professor X's identity is secretly the principal of the mutant school, but in public he is the heir of the famous Xavier family, a real big capitalist. If you say it, it is more influential than the Stark Group in some aspects. The rise of the Stark Group is mainly due to Tony's father Howard, who was not actually a big group before. But the Xavier family is a noble family with a long history, with a long inheritance and deep roots. Without solid evidence, arresting the heir of the Xavier family and confiscating all the property of the Xavier family will make all the old capitalists feel a sense of crisis. Because you can raid the Xavier family without evidence today, and you can find a reason to raid them tomorrow, and everyone will be in danger. And can the government produce solid evidence that the professor killed people? Of course not. The professor has epilepsy and his brain is out of control. He directly killed the people around him with mental power. Even in the surveillance, everyone suddenly collapsed and died. There is no way to prove that it was the professor who killed them. On the other hand, we have to consider the negative impact. If it is confirmed that the professor who helped the government deal with crises many times before and was received and awarded by the president many times killed so many people at once, then the government will also be responsible, and its influence will decline, and even the president will be greatly affected. So at that time, they could only arrest and detain secretly, and could not put it in the open, and even the whole incident was deliberately downplayed. If so, it's really a good choice. George thought carefully and approved Professor X's proposal. The Westchester incident happened 25 years ago, in 1984, when Tony Stark was only 15 years old and had just entered the undergraduate program of the Department of Electrical Engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Captain Marvel Carol Danvers had not yet become a pilot, Nick Fury was just an ordinary S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and Star-Lord Peter Quill was only 6 years old and his mother was still alive. So perhaps no one really cared about the mutant school being empty there. It is estimated that the police sent by the government to search at that time could not even find the basement under the school. I have no objection, as long as the children are safe. Gabriella also raised her hand in agreement. He thought that since the professor and George thought it was feasible, there should be no problem. She was just a Mexican nurse with shallow knowledge. What she had to do was to take good care of the children, not to express her opinions randomly. She knew her position very well. Seeing that everyone agreed, Wolverine no longer objected. In fact, he wanted to go to the school again, because it was his spiritual harbor. As for Caliban, he went wherever the professor and Wolverine were, not caring about the specific place. So the truck changed direction and drove all the way to New York. Because there were too many children and none of them had identities, they did not go into the city along the way, but just bought supplies in some small towns along the way, and drove to remote places to rest when they were tired. After 2 days, they finally arrived in the Bronx in northern New York. Perhaps because he faced himself, the professor's condition improved a little. Although he could not use his abilities as before, it was no problem to occasionally affect the thinking of ordinary people. This also made their journey much smoother. During the period, in order to prevent being tracked, they also changed trucks many times. Sell the truck to a second-hand market, and then go to another second-hand market to buy a different model of second-hand truck with a little money, and keep switching. After arriving in the Bronx, they did not go directly to the school where the professor's 4 garden castles were transformed, but George and Wolverine disguised themselves and went to find out the bottom first. The situation was indeed as the professor expected. It had been empty and unoccupied. It was just that the castle had been uninhabited for a long time and looked much more dilapidated. After making sure that the school was safe, they took the children and quietly entered the school at night and lived in the basement of the castle. The basement of the castle had 2 floors. In addition to the professor's brainwave amplification room and the former X-Men training room, there were more than a dozen vacant rooms. Everyone could make do and live there. There are still planes. George was stunned when he saw the X-Fighter in front of him. He didn't expect that the X-Fighter was still in the school basement. He thought it had been driven away by Wolverine and Professor X when they were escaping. Wolverine took off his suit and shirt, changed back to his favorite jacket, and explained to George with a cigar in his mouth. "It's a pity that I can't fly a plane. otherwise I wouldn't have been so embarrassed when I took the professor to escape. At that time, the professor's brain went out of control and killed all the mutants in the school. In order to save the professor, he drove the professor directly to the hospital. Although the professor's condition eased later, they were also arrested by a large number of agents sent by the FBI. If he could fly a plane at the time, he could take the professor out of the United States directly and go to other countries to treat the professor, and he could also escape the government's wanted list. It's good to have it. It will be useful in the future. At this time, George remembered that Wolverine not only couldn't fly a plane, but also seemed to be a little afraid of heights and airsick. In the movie, it is usually the Beast, Mystique, Storm, Cyclops and Phoenix who take turns to fly the X-Fighter. But this is not a bad thing. Although this X-Fighter is a fighter from more than 20 years ago, it is not much worse than the most advanced Quinjet of S.H.I.E.L.D. because it was modified by Beast, a highly intelligent scientist. Not only is it fast, it can also be invisible and shielded from satellite reconnaissance. In the future, as long as one of them learns to fly an airplane, they can rely on this X-Fighter to evacuate everyone in time when they encounter any danger. For example, the Chitauri invasion of New York was not effectively stopped. By the way, you can ride this motorcycle when you go to the city to investigate intelligence in the future. It is Scott's favorite. After special modification, it is 3 times faster than the fastest motorcycle in the world. After visiting the X-Fighter, Wolverine took George to find a normal-looking motorcycle in the basement. Wolverine, the professor, and Caliban are too conspicuous and cannot appear in the city often, otherwise they will inevitably be discovered by the government. They can only help at critical moments. So the task of going to the Stark Group in Manhattan to find out information about Tony Stark will depend on George himself. It seems that Scott has good vision. George took a test ride on the motorcycle and showed a satisfied look on his face. Since the journey was smooth and the Mutant Academy was better than he expected, he no longer planned to contact Tony Stark so quickly and expose himself to forces such as S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. So naturally, he didn't need to go to Manhattan to get intelligence, and he didn't need to kidnap Obadiah to torture Tony Stark's location in the Middle East. However, he still needed to use this motorcycle to go to the downtown area of the Bronx to get information about local gangs and bad businessmen. Because he planned to go to the downtown area of the Bronx to make a big deal before Tony Stark escaped. At present, his own plan is to study magic hard in the first 3 months. After 3 months, he will clean up all the rich and powerful gangs in the entire Bronx, get a lot of money, and buy crazily when the Stark Group's stocks are at their lowest. Then sell them all after Tony Stark comes back and the Stark Group's stocks rise. When Tony Stark announced the closure of the weapons department of the Stark Group and stopped selling weapons, he would buy them crazily again, so that he could instantly have a large amount of wealth, so that he and the children in the school would not have to worry about money. Of course, this kind of thing can only be done once. If he goes to clean up the gangs every day, it will inevitably attract the attention of Kingpin, the ruler of the underground world, and other forces. If you walk by the river, you will get your shoes wet. If you do it too much, he and the mutant school may be exposed. But if you only do one deal, run away after it is done, and never show your head again, in the Bronx where there are few cameras, even Sherlock Holmes can't find him. So this deal must be a big deal, and you must scout the place in advance to collect intelligence. He has a good eye, especially when it comes to women. I used to hate that guy, but now I miss him a little. Wolverine looked at the motorcycle and couldn't help but fall into memories. George immediately understood when he heard it. He knew that Cyclops and Wolverine both liked Phoenix, but Phoenix finally chose Cyclops. By the way, we will definitely use electricity when we use these facilities in the basement. Will it attract the attention of the government? Or we should buy some generators. Although the power is not that sufficient, it is much safer. 25 years have passed. The government has probably forgotten about the castle here, and will not keep an eye on the castle's electricity consumption. However, he thinks that it is better to be cautious in everything. It is rare to find such a good retreat. If it is exposed, we have to find it again. After he learns the Muggle shielding spell, he will not have to be so cautious. Even if the school is reopened, he will not have to worry about being discovered by the government. You can rest assured about this. The electricity consumption of the two basements has been specially modified because of a special accident before. The beast has added a special power supply system, which is different from the power supply above the castle. It has also carried out a lot of defense upgrades. Even if the facilities are fully opened, no traces of electricity will be found. Wolverine waved his hand at George's reminder. That's good. Special accident. Is it the invasion of Apocalypse, or William Stryker leading his troops to attack the college? George didn't ask about this in detail. Anyway, it didn't matter which one it was. What mattered was that he knew it was safe here and he could study magic with peace of mind. I will take time to go outside to gather intelligence during this period. If possible, I think you and the professor can help guide these children and learn how to use their abilities to fight better. Finally, George also made a suggestion to Wolverine. Since the battle simulation room in the basement can be used normally, it can be used to train the children to use their abilities to fight. Unlike the rough training of the laymen in the experimental base, the real experts like the professor and Wolverine can better develop the potential of the children. He didn't ask these children to play most of the roles in the battle in a short time, at least it would be good to be able to protect themselves and not become a burden. Acre Gene Company will never let them go like this. It will be a matter of time before they find them based on the traces. At that time, it may not only be the copy of Wolverine, but also the copy of the Professor, Magneto and Cyclops. Of course, George believed that the strength of those copies must be very different from the original. Because except for some special types, many mutants' abilities need to be developed and comprehended in order to exert stronger power. Just like Magneto, he was not that strong when he first appeared, and it was Professor X who developed and guided him to become stronger later. The clones made by Sandor Rice have an IQ similar to that of a child, and their actions are basically all remotely controlled. How could they develop their abilities? Major William Stryker in the movie used Wade as his main body and integrated so many mutant abilities, but he was still beheaded by Wolverine and Sabretooth. Facts have proved that unless the mind control is released, the clones cannot grow beyond the main body and can only become miscellaneous soldiers. It's just that too many miscellaneous soldiers are also a headache. Actually, if you don't tell me, I also have such a plan. If it were before, the professor would not have agreed with the children being exposed to fighting so early, but now, he must be very willing to allow these children to have more ability to protect themselves. Quote. Wolverine agreed with little hesitation. In the former mutant school, Professor, it is up to you to decide what kind of job you want to do in the future and what kind of person you want to be. Only if you really want to stay in school and become an X-Men as an adult, you will be trained in combat. However, the situation is obviously very different now. In order to survive better, even children must learn to develop their own abilities and learn to fight and protect themselves. If every child could have the strength of Little Wolf Girl, together they would not be afraid of being hunted down by the Acquaintances Gene Company. Okay, then have a good rest. After George and Wolverine inspected the entire two-story basement, they each returned to their rooms to rest. They have been rushing for the past 2 days and have not had a good rest. Now they can finally fall back and sleep peacefully. Just like that, 4 days later. As usual, George went to the Bronx to collect intelligence. When he came back, he immersed himself in studying magic. At night, he focused mainly on his own clone in the Harry Potter world. While the main body of the Marvel world was busy escaping from prison, the clones were not idle either. Except for the occasional reception of Tonks and her colleagues, they were basically studying magic theories and learning to practice new magic. But today is an exception, because today is September 1st, the day he is leaving to go to Hogwarts. Peppa, let's go. After placing the cage containing the giant owl, George locked the door of the shop, pushed the cart filled with luggage, and walked out of Nocturne Alley. Paige is the name he gave to his pet owl, because this owl is super edible. If he hadn't inherited the legacy of the old wizard, he wouldn't have been able to keep such a big pet. But if you can eat it, you can eat it, and it is indeed very useful. In order to prevent the store from being visited by dark wizards while he was in school, he had discounted all the potions and herbs in the store that he could not use in the past few days. It's just that few of the wizards who come to his store to buy things are easy to deal with. If he hadn't seen Peppa Pig, a giant owl, standing on the beam of the shop and staring eagerly, he might have made some small moves. For example, he used a confusion spell to make him confused and gave away expensive potions for nothing. Pushing a cart that was taller than himself, George walked out of Nocturne Alley, then turned into Diagon Alley. After about a few hundred meters, he came to a seemingly ordinary red brick wall. He took out his wand and tapped on a few specific bricks on the wall. The bricks on the wall immediately began to shake, and soon a wide archway appeared in front of him. Continuing to push the cart through the archway, he entered the famous Leaky Cauldron in Diagon Alley, a wizard hotel-style bar that integrated food and accommodation. He had eaten here several times when he was free. To be honest, the taste was average, the environment was average, and even a little dirty and cramped. After extending his hand to say hello to the boss, Old Tom, George did not stop at the Leaky Cauldron, but went directly to the Muggle Street outside the bar, and then stood quietly on the roadside and waited. Originally, he planned to take the Muggle subway to King's Cross Station, but the last time Tonks took his colleagues to eat at his place, they knew that he was going to King's Cross Station today and had to drive over to see him off. After waiting on the roadside for about 10 minutes, an old-fashioned dark green car drove over from a distance and parked next to him. "Hey, George, you're 10 minutes early." Tonks opened the door and got out of the passenger seat. George smiled and replied, "I'm used to doing everything a little early so I don't have to rush. This is a good habit, but it's a pity that I haven't been able to develop it." Tonks laughed and helped George move the luggage into the trunk of the car. She had a carefree personality and was very fast-paced in her work. Invisible stretching charm. Seeing Tonks put a lot of her luggage and Peppa Pig into the small trunk easily, George had a look of surprise on his face. The Traceless Extension spell is a magical spell that can expand the area of space. A wizard who is proficient in this spell can even expand a small box to the size of a city. Just like the famous magical zoologist Newt Scamander, he made such a large suitcase by himself. However, according to wizarding laws, wizards are not allowed to use this spell for private use, and can only be used on public items approved by the Ministry of Magic. For example, during the International Quidditch Tournament, magic tents were rented to wizard audiences from various countries. Of course, saying that, because this spell is too convenient in life, most wizards will still use it secretly. As long as they are not caught by Aurors, it doesn't matter much. It seems that you have been studying very carefully recently. This trunk has indeed been used with the Traceless Extension charm. But don't worry, this is a special Auror vehicle of the Ministry of Magic, and it is a legal modification. Tonks closed the trunk and winked triumphantly at George. She is still a trainee Auror, but due to her outstanding performance, she can already use the Ministry of Magic's Auror-specific magic car. Excellent. George gave a thumbs up. On the surface, Tonks is 19 years old and George is 11 years old. Tonks is a big sister. But in fact, Tonks's mental age is 19 years old, while George's mental age is already in his 30s, much more mature than Tonks. "Good morning, George." After getting in the car, a young male wizard wearing a bright green velvet suit sitting in the driver's seat waved and greeted him. "Hey, if you go to Hogwarts to study, we won't have free meals in the future." "Good morning, Aldo, you can wait for my vacation, which will only take a few months." George smiled and replied. He knew this guy. He and Tonks had come to eat a few times. He was very obsessed with the Chinese food he made. He was a classmate who graduated at the same time as Tonks and is now a trainee Auror in the Ministry of Magic. And he could see that this guy was pursuing Tonks, but Tonks only regarded him as a brother. It can only be said that love cannot be forced. Tonks likes uncle types like Lupin, and is not interested in handsome young men like Lardo. Don't listen to his nonsense. Go to Hogwarts and study magic well, it is really a very good school. Tonks sat in the passenger seat and hit Lardo on the back of the head, then turned to Chao-Ji and said. Lardo touched the back of his head, and was used to it. He skillfully started the magic car and drove towards King's Cross Station. Magic alchemy, I must study it carefully in the future. In less than 20 minutes, the magic car stopped outside King's Cross Station. George refused Tonks's kindness to send him in, while pushing the cart and thinking to himself. In fact, the road from the Leaky Cauldron to King's Cross Station just now was not so smooth, just in time for the traffic jam. But the car of the Ministry of Magic obviously also added high-level space magic with alchemy. Aldo just pressed a button, and the car was light compressed, easily passing through the gaps between the cars that were less than 1 person wide. The spells in this world are very magical, and all kinds of magic items made by alchemy are also very magical. After learning magic alchemy well, he can completely transform the mutant school into a magical castle similar to Hogwarts in the future. Ordinary people can't break in without his permission. 9 3/4 station. Coming to the partition wall between the 9th and 10th platforms, George pushed the cart straight into it. Then, something magical happened. He and the cart seemed to hit a transparent water curtain and passed through it without any hindrance. The scene changed, and a very special platform appeared in front of him. The most conspicuous one was the crimson steam locomotive, on which it was written, Hogwarts Express, departing at 11 o'clock. He had seen the introduction of this magical magic train in a special magic history book before. If you want to have a deep understanding of the magic of this world and be able to live in the wizarding world in the future, mastering the knowledge of magic history is also a top priority. Many methods of learning and cracking magic can actually be seen in the history of magic. So he would spend a certain amount of time every day to study the various history books he bought. The Hogwarts Express was built in the early and middle 19th century by a Muggle engineer, a large number of Muggle railwaymen, and most of the wizards in the Ministry of Magic at that time. This magic train route also used the world's largest number of forgetfulness spells and the largest scale of Muggle expulsion spells. The reason was that the then very responsible Minister of Magic, Ottoline Gamble, felt that it was too unsafe and uncomfortable for young wizards to use portkeys to go to Hogwarts. Every year, young wizards were lost due to improper use of portkeys. Inspired by the Muggle steam train, the Hogwarts Express and the super-long railway route were created. It is said that this move was protested by some pure-blood families, but was strongly suppressed by the Minister of Magic on the grounds that they would not be admitted to Hogwarts if they did not take the train. This magic steam train travels between platform 9 3/4 of King's Cross Station in London and Hogsmeade Station, a total of 6 times a year. School starts once on September 1st, 4 times at Christmas and Easter, and once in June. At this time, the thick smoke of the steam engine filled the sky above the platform. Because George came early, there were not many young wizards and wizard parents on the platform, and it was not noisy. He pushed the cart into the carriage marked for the first grade, found a compartment at random, stuffed his luggage neatly onto the upper shelf, and then placed the cage containing the owl in the corner of the compartment next to him. Sleep well, don't scream and scare the little wizards who will come later. After telling Paige, George took out a book, On the Importance of Basic Magic Theory, and began to read it attentively. It takes about 5 or 6 hours to get from London to Hogwarts, so it can't be wasted. As time went by, there were more and more wizards on the platform outside the window, as well as various magical pets, and little wizards gradually entered the carriage. Wow, is this your pet? What a big owl! A little boy with a magic camera hanging around his neck was attracted by the huge owl page when he was pushing his cart past the compartment where George was, and walked in involuntarily. He put his luggage in the corner, picked up his magic camera and took a few pictures excitedly, then introduced himself to George. Hello, my name is Colin Creevey. Just call me George. George looked up at the boy and nodded with a smile. He was somewhat familiar with this name. It seemed that he was a crazy fan of Harry and liked to take pictures of his idol Harry the most. George, Colin was very lively and talkative. He sat next to George very familiarly and started chattering. At this time, George had to put away the magic book and chat with him for a few words. Through the chat, I learned that Colin was born in a Muggle family and had a younger brother, Dennis Creevey. Because he was particularly fond of photography, after seeing the magical magic camera in Diagon Alley, he bought a magic camera with the money for buying a pet. The idol he admired most was Harry Potter, who was mentioned in A History of Modern Magic, The Rise and Fall of Black Magic, and Important Magic Events in the 20th Century. He was only 1 year older than him, but he defeated Voldemort, who frightened the wizarding world. By the way, George, I've said so much, but you haven't told me about yourself yet. After a long chat, Colin realized that he didn't know George at all. In order not to continue talking, George smiled and said, I am an orphan, I have never seen my parents, and I have no family, so there is nothing to introduce. Colin was stunned when he heard this, and then a sympathetic look appeared on his face, and he quickly changed the subject. By the way, your owl is so big, what does it usually eat? European owls usually appear in Europe, Asia and Africa, and mainly inhabit mountain forests, plains, wilderness, forest edge shrubs, sparse forests, and exposed mountains and cliffs. It likes to eat farm rats, hares and pheasants, and sometimes frogs, snakes and lizards. It is said that it is one of the rare owl species that is not afraid of the gaze of the basilisk, and the other is the legendary phoenix. Quote, at this time, a somewhat trance-like voice suddenly sounded at the door of the box. George and Colin turned around to look. It was a little girl with silver eyes and dark golden brown hair. Her skin was very fair and her eyes were big, but her eyes were not focused. Therefore, the overall temperament seems a bit erratic and strange. The eagle owl is not afraid of the gaze of the basilisk. I don't seem to see any relevant introduction in the book. George asked, looking at the girl in surprise. Since he bought an eagle owl as a pet, how could he not look for relevant information, and he had read most of the information the girl just mentioned in the information, except for the last one. However, whether this last one is true is quite important, because there will indeed be a basilisk in Hogwarts this year, and it is a 1,000-year-old basilisk. So he had to verify it carefully. The history of basilisks is too long and has long been banned by the Ministry of Magic, so few books mention this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like the scimitar horned Snorlax, wizards do not believe this magical animal exists, but my father was lucky enough to see it once in Sweden. Quote, the girl tilted her head and replied, what is a Snorlax? Colin's face was full of curiosity. The girl explained, it's a magical animal with special horns but it can't fly. Okay, that should be the poison-horned beast. By this time George already knew the identity of the girl, Luna Lovegood. Her father was Xenophilius Lovegood, the editor-in-chief of the Quibbler magazine, and her mother was Pandora Lovegood, who died accidentally when she was 9 years old while experimenting with spells. It can be seen that without sufficient theoretical foundation of magic, creating new spells is also a very dangerous thing. Because his family was well educated, what Luna said about the eagle owl might be true, but about the Shireno-horned Snorlax, he knew that Xenophilius had made it up to comfort his daughter. The so-called curved horned snorkel is actually a poison-horned beast, and its special horn is also in danger of exploding. There are still seats here. Let me help you put your luggage on the rack. Because he wanted to learn more knowledge from Luna that was not in the books, George took the initiative to get up and help her move the luggage on the cart to the shelf above. Thank you, my name is Luna Lovegood. Luna was also very interested in the eagle owl, so she did not refuse, but she couldn't help but let out a sigh when she saw the thin and frail George lifting her luggage to the high shelf very easily. You are so strong. After Luna sat down, the three chatted again. But mainly Colin, who was as curious as a baby, was asking, Luna was answering, and George was listening quietly. He would only ask questions when he encountered knowledge that interested him. Woo! The long whistle sounded and the train was about to leave. At this time, the sliding door of the box was suddenly opened, and a girl with thick, fiery red hair, bright brown eyes, and a face as delicate and cute as a doll walked in. Is there anyone here? She asked, pointing to the seat next to Luna. Everywhere else is full. No, you can sit next to me. Luna smiled softly. The girl was visibly relieved when she heard this, because her brothers were the last to board the train. She certainly wouldn't admit that she almost forgot the magical notebook. Little Ginny, we're here to help you. At this time, a pair of identical red-haired twin boys walked in. They happily helped their sister pack her luggage, and then left in a noisy manner when her sister was driven away by her disgust. Hello everyone, my name is Ginny, Ginny Weasley. After driving away the two troublesome brothers, Ginny sat next to Luna and introduced herself generously. She was not a shy person, except in front of Harry. Luna Lovegood, Colin Creevey, George. The three of them also introduced themselves. George, you have the same name as my brother, one of the two just now. He is also called George, George Weasley. By the way, what's your last name? Quote, just call me George. George smiled and didn't explain much. Although his pronunciation of George and George Weasley's George are the same, there are essential differences. George Weasley's surname is Weasley and his first name is George, but his surname is actually Joe, and his first name is G, which means, governing. His father hoped that he could become an official and govern a country in the future, so he took this name. So actually, according to the name here, he should be called George Chow. It's just that he thought it sounded too awkward, so when he told people, he just called him George. Ginny, how many brothers do you have in your family? At this time, the kind-hearted Colin suddenly changed the topic. He felt that George, as an orphan, probably didn't want people to know his last name. Ginny didn't think much, stretched out her hands and bent 4 fingers. 6. Bill is a cursebreaker in Gringotts, Egypt, Charlie is a dragon tamer in Romania, Percy is in 6th grade, George and Fred are in 4th grade, you just watched, Ron. So much. Hearing Ginny's answer, both Colin and Luna looked surprised. There were so many children, not to mention wizarding families, even Muggle families were rare. Listening to the 3 people's chat, George moved his eyes away from Ginny's suitcase and sighed in his heart. If all wizarding families could be as fertile as the Weasley family, wizards would probably rule the world long ago, and Muggles would have nothing to worry about. While the 4 of them were chatting, the train also started to move out of King's Cross Station, speeding along the fields full of cattle and sheep, heading towards Scotland quickly. It was the first time for them to travel away from home, and they went to the famous Hogwarts. Even the quietest Luna was actually a little excited. So the 3 of them never stopped chatting. Because much of what the 3 chatted about later had nothing to do with magic, but their respective childhood experiences and family situations, George gradually withdrew from the chat and began to read a book. Around 12:30, a smiling and dimpled Miko opened the box door and asked, "Dear children, would you like to buy some food for the car? There are BB's multi-flavored beans, bubble super bubble gum, chocolate frogs, pumpkin pie, crucible-shaped cakes, and licorice wands." Facing the small cart of magic snacks and the witch's question, the 3 of them shook their heads at the same time. Colin was born into a Muggle family and naturally didn't have much money. All his remaining money was spent on magic cameras. Although Ginny was born into a pure-blood family, her father had long been expelled from the family for being close to Muggles and loving Muggle items. All the family's expenses came from her father's salary from the Ministry of Magic. With so many children going to school, and the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbooks for several of her brothers this year being particularly expensive, even many of her school supplies were secondhand, so how could she get any pocket money to buy snacks? As for Luna, she is not short of pocket money, but she doesn't seem to like snacks much. "One of each, thank you." George knew the situation of several young wizards, so he got up and spent 12 silver sickles and 5 bronze nuts, ordered a portion of all the snacks, and placed them on the table. "Ginny, I heard you just said that you know a poisonous spell called the Bat Charm. I wonder if you can teach it to me when you have time." He pushed a quarter of the snacks in front of Ginny, and Ginny nodded with bright eyes. "Of course, no problem. That's my best spell. Even George and Fred have fallen victim to it. Luna, I would like to ask you some knowledge about magical animals." George pushed another quarter of the snack in front of Luna. Luna smiled and nodded, but did not refuse. Finally, George put aside his share and pushed the remaining quarter towards Colin. "Do you have time to take a magic photo for me? I want to keep it as a souvenir. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train and we will take you to school." Night had fallen outside the window, and there were mountains and woods under the deep purple sky. The speed of the train gradually slowed down, and a loud reminder suddenly appeared in the passage of the carriage. "It's time for us to change into our school uniforms." George took off his coat and put on his black Hogwarts wizard robes. Luna, Ginny and Colin also reacted and quickly changed into their school uniforms. After the train stopped, the little wizards swarmed out, pushing and shoving in the aisles, fearing that they would miss something if they took a step too slow. Some of the little wizards' faces were so squeezed that they were distorted. "Don't worry." Seeing this situation, George decisively stopped Ginny and the 3 others who were trying to squeeze in from behind. "We have already arrived at the station, and there is no way to escape from a castle as big as Hogwarts, so there is no need to panic and squeeze out." Unlike other little wizards, he was very curious and looking forward to Hogwarts, but he was not nervous or confused. On the one hand, he is not a real child after all, and on the other hand, he has experienced time travel, rebirth, soul splitting, and escape fighting. His heart is much calmer than that of a normal adult. About 2 minutes later, the number of little wizards in the aisle began to decrease, and George took the 3 little ones out of the box and walked slowly out of the car door. Follow me and don't go over to the upperclassmen. George, to be honest, you sometimes feel like my dad to me, very reliable. Ginny couldn't help but said as she followed George. Yeah, he's more reliable than my dad. Thinking of her father Arthur's sometimes unreliable behavior, she added another sentence. Colin and Luna nodded in agreement. Although they had only known each other for less than a day, George had left a very reliable image on them. He speaks calmly and rarely shows surprise for anything. He helps them carry their luggage up and down, wipes their faces when they get dirty from eating snacks, and gets up to cover them with wizard robes when they are sleepy in the afternoon. Even when I got off the car, I felt like an adult was around and that as long as I obeyed, I would be safe. George also smiled when he heard this. In fact, his behaviors were just behaviors that adults would do subconsciously when they see children, especially children who are not annoying. His body in this world is that of a child, but if you want him to keep pretending to be a child, that is really not easy. So he didn't think it was necessary. Given his background in this world, it was normal for him to mature earlier. This was not a bad thing. Freshmen, come over here. Just then, a familiar voice sounded. George turned his head and looked, and it was Hagrid, the gamekeeper, standing on the side of the station holding a magic lantern, shouting loudly. Even though there were hundreds of students at the station at this time, Hagrid's height of 3 to 4 meters still stood out and it was difficult to miss. Follow me. After turning around and giving instructions, George inserted himself into the dense crowd like a sharp knife, easily pushing aside the senior wizards in front of him, and quickly arrived at Hagrid's side. In terms of strength, even a 7th grade wizard is far behind him. We meet again, little boss. Seeing George, Hagrid immediately bent down and said hello. He still had fresh memories of the little wizard boss who lived in Nocturne Alley and sold him potions at a discount. Hello, Hagrid. George also smiled and nodded. You know Hagrid, why does he call you little boss? Ginny lay next to George's ear and asked curiously. She had never met Hagrid, but she often heard her brother Ron mention it, so she guessed his identity. My adoptive father ran a potion shop. He passed away unexpectedly some time ago. Hagrid came to buy potions. George replied casually. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I hope you won't feel sad. Hearing what George said, Ginny's expression immediately turned guilty, while Luna and Colin also had sympathetic looks on their faces. It doesn't matter. George smiled. He wanted to say that he killed the old guy with his own hands, but he knew that saying so would definitely frighten the 3 little guys. After staying next to Hagrid for a while, the first-year wizards soon arrived, about 30 people in total. In fact, there are not many students in Hogwarts. Normally, there are about 300 students. There are about 40 students in a grade. When there are many students, there are more than 40 students, and when there are few students, there are more than 30 students. It's normal when you think about it. After all, there are not many teachers in the college. Just like the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, which is taught by all 7 grades, but there is actually only one teacher teaching it. If there are too many people, it is impossible to teach it. After everyone arrived, Hagrid led everyone through a narrow path to the Black Lake. Then as usual, he asked everyone to take a boat to the castle in groups of 4. This is a traditional ceremony necessary for the first grade admission every year. The purpose seems to be to commemorate the 4 legendary wizards who founded Hogwarts. Most of the people who were familiar with each other on the train sat together. Naturally, George took Luna, Ginny and Colin to sit on a boat. However, these ships are not ordinary ships, but ships with special magic spells attached through alchemy. They do not need oars to row, and can automatically generate wind to drive the ship forward. To be honest, the process of entering Hogwarts Castle from the Black Lake by boat was a bit shocking. Even George couldn't help but sigh a little when he looked up and saw the towering castle. One of the young wizards was so shocked that he accidentally fell into the lake halfway. But there was no accident, because as soon as the young wizard fell into the water, a giant octopus rescued him from the lake and put him back on the boat. Don't underestimate this Black Lake, there are many magical creatures living in it. Crossing the Black Lake, going ashore from the underground dock of the castle, and following the tunnel between the rocks to the castle gate, Hagrid handed them over to a tall black-haired witch in an emerald-green robe. This witch was none other than the Professor of Transfiguration, the headmaster of Gryffindor, Minerva McGonagall. Welcome to Hogwarts. The opening banquet is about to begin, but before you take your seat in the auditorium, you must first determine which college you will enter. Professor McGonagall took them to a small house on the left side of the hall on the first floor of the castle and briefly introduced the 4 colleges and the very important College Cup to them. After Professor McGonagall left, the young wizards began to buzz and talk, and the topic was naturally about the sorting ceremony. George was no exception to this, because at this moment he was also thinking about which college he would be sorted into. He was not Harry Potter. The sorting hat would not waste time for him, nor would it send him to any college he wanted to go to. He would be directly assigned according to the results of the magic test like other little wizards. But it didn't matter. In his opinion, all colleges were the same and had their own advantages, because no matter which college he went to, he would become the best and most dazzling one. From today on, Hogwarts will welcome the most powerful and gifted wizard genius in history, and that is George. Is George's body considered a genius in this world? Naturally, it doesn't count. Whether it's memory or understanding, they are actually very average. On the contrary, his body in Marvel's original body, because he inherited Professor X's genes, is really a genius in terms of memory and understanding. If it was just like this, he would naturally not have the confidence to become the most powerful and talented student in the entire history of Hogwarts. His confidence mainly comes from 2 points. The first point is that he does not only have one brain, he only has one will. But now that he is able to skillfully operate 2 bodies, it is actually equivalent to being able to operate 2 brains at the same time for memory, analysis and understanding. For example, when his clone in the Harry Potter world saw a calculation problem, if he just used the clone to calculate it, it might take him 20 seconds to figure it out mentally. If the main world body is awakened at the same time and joins the calculation, and the 2 brains work together, it may not take 10 seconds to calculate the result mentally. In the same way, when he was researching and learning a magic, 2 brains learning together was much better than 1 brain. At that time, he was already comparable to some top geniuses. For this reason, he also specially changed the work and rest time of the main world. In the future, the clone will go to class during the day, and the main body will also act as a second brain in the Marvel world at night to assist in improving learning efficiency and then catch up on sleep during the day. Secondly, he did something else in the days before school started. That is to use the supercomputer in the basement of the Mutant Academy to record all the books and textbooks he has read in the Harry Potter world into the computer. He also doesn't plan to let go of all the knowledge points from later classes and the books in the school library. The 2 brains were loaded and working together, turning him into a top genius, but he couldn't forget anything. Not to mention him, even the top wizards and legendary wizards in the wizarding world cannot remember every word in every book they have read. But it's different now. All the content is input into the supercomputer. As long as he searches for keywords, the relevant information can jump out immediately. So in the next course, when faced with all the teacher's questions, if he can't remember clearly, he can use the supercomputer to search and get the answers quickly, thereby getting all the points. In the exam, as long as it involves theoretical knowledge, it is no different from an open book exam. In the next 7 years, he will trick all the little wizards to death, including the famous academic master Hermione, and it is impossible to beat him. As for why, of course, it is to get more resources and better magic. Only those who are good enough can have more privileges. If Hermione hadn't been good enough, how could she have gotten the Time Turner? If Voldemort hadn't been good enough, how could he have been admired by so many wizards, favored by teachers, and learned so many powerful black magics? So he also has to be excellent in all aspects, preferably so good that even Dumbledore doubts that he is the savior who can save the world. Although that possibility is relatively small. You tell me, how can they accurately assign us to which college? It couldn't be that I passed some kind of test. I didn't read anything except a lot of history of magic. Quote. Colin's expression was vaguely uneasy. A young wizard born into a Muggle family basically has no foundation in magic. If he were tested in this area, he would really know nothing. Ron told me it was a scary test, but I didn't believe how the school could do something dangerous to students. If it was, I don't think Ron would have passed the test. Quote. Ginny looked like she didn't care about any test. She thought she was much better than Ron's timid brother. Luna still looked so erratic. Although Dad didn't tell me the specific method of sorting into colleges, he said that the whole process is very simple, and we will be sorted into the college that suits us best, so don't worry. That's it, that's good. Which college are you going to? Colin was relieved when he heard this, and then became a little excited. I want to go to Gryffindor. Harry Potter is in Gryffindor, and it is said that the greatest wizard Dumbledore is also from Gryffindor. I also want to go to Gryffindor. My brothers are all Gryffindors. Ginny replied with a slight blush. In fact, the more important reason is that her favorite Harry Potter is in Gryffindor. It will be all right, Luna and George said at the same time. Ah, at this moment, a scream suddenly came from the hut. It turned out that a group of ghosts appeared through the wall, scaring the little wizards. The ghosts laughed and commented on the little wizards. After seeing Professor McGonagall appear, they dispersed and disappeared. Now, get in single file and follow me, Professor McGonagall said with a serious expression, then carried the little wizards out of the hut and walked towards the auditorium on the other side of the hall. It's really magnificent. As the team entered the auditorium, George's eyes also lit up. The first thing that caught his eye was the thousands of magic candles floating in midair, and then the beautiful virtual starry sky seen on the ceiling presented by magic. There are 4 long seats below, each one represents a college, and each one is filled with 6 grades of wizards. There were golden plates and goblets on the table. There was another long table on the table opposite, where all the teachers of the school sat. The oldest and most eye-catching person in the middle should be Dumbledore, and Flitwick, Sprout, Lockhart and others sat on both sides. However, he did not see Professor Snape, the Dean of Slytherin. After careful recollection, he remembered that the professor should be patrolling the castle at this time to arrest Harry and Ron, who had been in the news. Because Dobby, the house elf of the Malfoy family, was worried that Harry would encounter the danger brought by Voldemort's diary when he came to Hogwarts this year, he closed the entrance when Harry and Ron entered the 9 3/4 station. The two missed the Hogwarts Express and had to drive Arthur's privately modified magic car to Hogwarts. However, due to Ron's unskilled driving skills, he forgot to be invisible when he took off at the beginning, and many Muggles witnessed the magical scene of the car flying in the air, which was also reported in the Daily Prophet. At this moment, it is estimated that the two have arrived at the school, but they just didn't catch up with the sorting ceremony. He turned his head and looked at the windows around the Great Hall. Sure enough, at a window, he saw 2 boys looking inside, but they were quickly pulled out by a pair of big hands. Poor 2 little guys, 2 seconds of silence for you. Harry and Ron were caught on the spot by Snape, and it was estimated that the next step would be bad. Because Lily was Harry's mother, Snape would protect Harry even if he sacrificed his own life. But because James was Harry's father, Snape also hated Harry from the bottom of his heart. There was a 4-legged stool in front of the long table on the stage, and on the stool was a patched, historical, pointed wizard hat. The pointed wizard hat was singing a song by itself until Professor McGonagall came forward. Whoever's name I call now, put on the hat, sit on the stool, and wait for the sorting. Professor McGonagall took out a parchment roll. Colin Creevey. Colin was startled, and immediately trotted up, sat down nervously and put on the hat. Almost without a pause, the hat gave the answer. Gryffindor. All the wizards at the long table of Gryffindor applauded, celebrating that their college had a new student. Astoria Greengrass. Slytherin. Luna Lovegood. Ravenclaw. Ginny Weasley. Gryffindor. As the little wizards were called up one by one, it was soon George's turn. George. The moment George put on the sorting hat, like other little wizards, he didn't hear any hesitation or questioning from the sorting hat, and got the answer directly. Slytherin. It's Slytherin. George showed a little surprise on his face, but he quickly restrained his emotions, put down the sorting hat, and walked slowly to the Slytherin table and sat down. To be honest, he thought he was most likely Gryffindor, and a little Ravenclaw, but he didn't expect it to be Slytherin. But after thinking about it, he likes to have plans and clear goals when doing things, and sometimes he is more realistic, which is in line with some characteristics of Slytherin. Maybe he really prefers Slytherin's personality characteristics in his bones. Slytherin does not mean bad, and none of the 4 major colleges refers to absolutely good or absolutely bad. Gryffindor has also produced some wizards like Pettigrew, and Slytherin has also produced wizards like Regulus who are willing to sacrifice themselves to resist Voldemort, and even prefer to die rather than let the house elves replace them. The characteristics of the four major colleges are actually mostly positive. Gryffindor is brave, Ravenclaw is knowledgeable, Hufflepuff is upright, and Slytherin is smart, motivated and goal-oriented. Slytherin is also okay. Snape is more protective and proficient in dark magic. If he can win honor for Slytherin, he should have a lot of gains. When he came to his senses, the sorting ceremony was over. In fact, before that, for each college he might be assigned to, he analyzed the personality of each dean and made relevant response plans. Therefore, even if it was Slytherin, it would not be a big problem. Dumbledore said a few simple words, introduced the new defense against the dark arts Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, and announced the start of the dinner. Then, countless delicacies made by house elves appeared on the four long tables in an instant, and the hungry little wizards immediately began to show off. George also ate the food on the table, but he still paid some attention to the long table in front of the stage. Sure enough, not long after, a wizard with a thin figure, grayish-yellow skin, a hooked nose, greasy black hair draped over his shoulders, wearing a black robe and cloak, and exuding a cold aura appeared at the door of the auditorium. He walked quickly to the long table like a big bat, and all the little wizards he passed by, no matter which college or grade, couldn't help holding their breath. This person was none other than the Dean of Slytherin, Severus Snape. The top potion master, and a magic master second only to Dumbledore, Voldemort and Grindelwald. Snape said a few words to Dumbledore and McGonagall, and Professor McGonagall's face quickly turned ugly, and then the three of them walked out of the hall together. My father got promoted again in the Ministry of Magic. When I was 7, my mother bought me a sword worth 20 galleons. Humph, what's yours, me? At the Slytherin table, the first-year wizards began to show off their families and financial resources while eating. The little wizards who can be assigned to Slytherin are basically descendants of pure-blood families. Very few are mixed blood, and it is basically unlikely that there are little wizards born in pure Muggle families. So some of them knew each other when they were young. Even if they didn't know each other, they would deliberately show their families and financial resources at this time to ensure their next position. George didn't get involved. It is very likely that his body is a mixed blood. His Muggle mother had a relationship with his wizard father, and then got pregnant unexpectedly. When he couldn't find the father, he didn't want to drag himself down, and it was normal to abandon the child after giving birth. So in terms of family status, he must be at the bottom of Slytherin, so there is no need to ask for trouble. As a half-blood, as long as he shows absolute strength like Snape and Voldemort, he will naturally not lack status and admirers. Slytherin pays attention to bloodline and strength. Of course you have to be at least a half-blood. Oh, Merlin's beard, it's the Bloody Baron, he looks so scary. At this moment, the little wizards shuddered, because a scary ghost with a thin face, empty eyes, and covered in blood suddenly came to the Slytherin table and sat down. And the place where he sat was right next to George. George looked up at the Bloody Baron, a faint smile appeared on his face, he nodded to the Bloody Baron gracefully, as a greeting, and then continued to eat dinner leisurely. What's the big deal about being covered in blood? He has seen everything in the laboratory and killed dozens of people. How could he be afraid of this little blood? And the Bloody Baron was obviously a little surprised that someone could be so calm when seeing a first-year wizard for the first time. However, as a Slytherin ghost, he was quite satisfied that Slytherin had such a courageous little wizard, so he also nodded in response. Which family is he from? How dare he say hello to the Bloody Baron? I don't know. I haven't heard of him. He should be a half-blood. Half-blood, but he doesn't look like one. I think he looks like a wizard from one of the 28 families. He looks very elegant. George's performance in front of the Bloody Baron naturally caught the attention of all the Slytherin wizards. They were also curious about this elegant and bold little wizard. However, they soon concluded that George was a half-blood, because if he was pure blood, they would not have heard of him. His name, George, was also very strange. But even so, some little wizards, especially the little witches in the first and second grades, developed a little affection for George. This also made some little wizards look at George with a little more jealousy. Draco, he performed much better than you did last year. A short-haired little witch in the second-grade seat at the Slytherin long table teased the blonde boy sitting opposite. The boy's expression immediately became unhappy. What is he? He is just a half-blood. Let me tell you, I will be the team seeker this year and help Slytherin win the House Cup. Last year, the Bloody Baron sat next to him. He scared him half to death that year and became a big stain in his life. Draco, are you really going to join the team? Hearing the news that Draco was going to join the team, the attention of the little wizards was immediately attracted. You know, there are almost few wizards who don't like the sport of Quidditch, and the annual Quidditch game is also the most concerned thing for everyone. Of course, my skills are much better than that stupid Potter, he is just lucky. Malfoy said proudly. In fact, his father sold a lot of things in Nocturne Alley, and used the money to replace the entire Slytherin Quidditch team with the latest Nimbus 2001, so this opportunity came. When the banquet was about to end, Dumbledore, Snape and McGonagall rushed back. Dumbledore talked about some precautions and ended the opening dinner with a collective singing of the school song. First-year students, follow me. At this time, the fifth-year prefects on the four long tables stood up almost at the same time. The first-year students of the four colleges also stood up and followed the prefects of their respective colleges to their dormitories. Leaving the hall and coming to the lobby on the first floor, the four colleges began to separate. The little wizards of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw climbed the marble stairs to the upper floor of the castle, while the little wizards of Slytherin and Hufflepuff went to the basement of the castle. The Slytherin dormitory is even lower than the Hufflepuff dormitory. Let me tell you, of the four dormitories in the school, our Slytherin dormitory is the best, because you can directly see the underwater world of the Black Lake and the magical creatures living in the Black Lake from the dormitory and the lounge. The fifth-year prefect walking in front saw that the Slytherin wizards had a strange expression because of the cold and dark basement, so he immediately raised his head and proudly introduced them. When the wizards heard that they could see the magical creatures under the Black Lake in the dormitory, they immediately showed surprise. Because they were impressed by the big octopus that saved people when they took a boat across the Black Lake. Pureblood. Walking to a wall at the end of the basement, the prefect shouted a command loudly, and the wall immediately cracked, revealing a large room covered in green, which was the Slytherin common room. The password of the common room is changed every 2 weeks, and the new password will be notified on the bulletin board. The prefect introduced when he took the wizards into the lounge. At this time, the attention of the wizards was completely attracted by the scene in the lounge. Gorgeous decorations, exquisitely carved furniture, and the beautiful Black Lake view outside the transparent glass instantly diluted the darkness of the dungeon. The most magical thing is the medieval tapestry hanging on the wall, which depicts various famous adventures of the Slytherins at that time. It's like watching a big movie, and the protagonists in it will greet you from time to time. Look, it's a mermaid just swam over. Okay, you will see these often in the future, don't be too surprised. Now I suggest you go to your respective dormitories to tidy up. Boys are on the left and girls are on the right. Your names are posted on the door of the dormitory. Check in according to your names. The class leader waved his hand with satisfaction, and finally left after a few instructions. It's like living in an aquarium. George looked around the common room, and instead of continuing to visit the common room with other little wizards, he turned and walked towards the boys' dormitory. Soon he found his name at the door of a room, and there were 3 other names next to his name, which meant that he had 3 roommates. Baron Belanta, Ivy Thorne, Caesar Burke. It seems that they are not famous families. After a quick glance, he didn't care and pushed the door and walked into the dormitory. Like the common room, there are many transparent glass in the dormitory, so you can see the scenery of the lake bottom outside. It seems that you are not hungry either. On the bedside table closest to the door, George saw Paige feasting in the cage. It was obvious that the house elf responsible for transporting the luggage did not treat the pets of the little wizards badly and also prepared a sumptuous dinner. Coo, coo, Paige happily responded when he found George appeared, and continued to work hard. After packing his luggage, George sat on the soft bed and began to read the magic book. In fact, he read so hard to learn magic, not only to improve his strength and protect himself, but also because he really likes magic in his heart. Thinking about the things that only existed in illusions in his previous life, they actually appeared in front of him, and he could master this magical power, how could he not indulge in it? To be honest, in all the years of his previous life, there was nothing that made him so obsessed. If the body did not need enough sleep to learn magic better, he could even give up sleep and study and learn the magical power of magic 24 hours a day. Sometimes he also had the idea that this kind of life might be the life he wanted. Instead of going to get off work like a robot every day, wearing a mask to entertain leaders, colleagues and customers every day, and then slowly aging, turning into a handful of ashes and being buried in the cemetery by future generations. When he thought back to his life, there was nothing worth lingering on. That lowly mermaid dared to scare me through the glass. When I learn powerful black magic in the future, I must let her taste my power. Of course, we are the most noble wizards, and we are pure blood. We will definitely become big names in the wizarding world in the future. About half an hour later, the three little wizards chattered and walked into the dormitory. When they saw George and the huge page next to him, they were also shocked. Even they rarely saw owls as big as Paige, and their pet owls were only a little bigger than the palm. "Hey, kid, are you George Joe? Call me George, or Joe." George replied without raising his head. The three looked at each other, and one of the strongest-looking little wizards raised his neck and said, "I like your bed, now take your luggage to the innermost bed." The fathers of the three of them all worked in the Ministry of Magic, and they knew each other since childhood. After discovering that the last person in the dormitory was a half-blood who had attracted some attention at the dinner party, they decided to come in and teach him a lesson. So they didn't really like George's bed, but just wanted to give George a warning, so that he would know that they were the protagonists in this dormitory or in the first-year Slytherin college. Chapter 31. George closed the magic book in his hand and looked at the three people with some amusement. "I'm so sorry, I like this bed very much and don't want to give it up. You don't seem to understand the current situation." The three little wizards took a step forward at the same time, with a threatening look on their faces. "You should know that although the school prohibits us from using magic attacks, it does not say that we can't use fists." In their opinion, George is much thinner than them in terms of height and body shape, and there are three of them, and George is only one. If George doesn't understand the situation, they don't mind giving him a lesson. As far as I know, the tradition of Slytherin is that whoever is better is the boss. If you are better than me and have better grades in the future studies, then I am willing to give up my bed. What do you think? George suggested with a smile. If possible, he still doesn't want to beat up the children. After all, he is now a serious magician. And the most important thing for a magician is elegance. Rolling up your sleeves and beating people is what warriors do. What is he talking about? He means that he, a half-blood, will have better grades than the three of us pure bloods in the future. This is simply the funniest joke I have ever heard. The leading little wizard burst into laughter upon hearing this, and the two little wizards beside him followed suit. "I now order you to take your luggage and that stupid pet and roll to the innermost bed immediately, otherwise you will regret it." "Forget it, since you don't want to compete in grades, I also know a little bit of boxing." Seeing that the three new roommates were so ignorant, George put the magic book on the bedside, then stood up and moved his hands and feet. No magic, no ability, just relying on pure physical strength, at his current level, let alone the three in front of him, even if the entire first-year wizards came together, he could beat them all to tears. It's not that he has such a high level of fighting skills, it's just that his strength and speed are much higher than these little wizards. "It seems that you really need some lessons." The three little wizards saw George stand up, and said nothing more. They rolled up their wizard robes and rushed over. 2 minutes later, George sat down again gracefully, picked up the magic book and said while reading, "I advise you not to think about going to the teacher and the class leader to complain, otherwise the three of you beat me up and ended up being beaten like this. If it gets out, your next 7 years will be. We know, you. Don't be complacent, you are just a little stronger, if you have the ability, we will compete in grades and magic in the future." The three little wizards lying on the ground with bruises and tears on their faces suddenly changed their faces when they heard the words, and then stammered back. Just now they really had the idea of going to the teacher to complain and then let the teacher punish George severely, but now they think that if that really happens, they may really become the joke of the whole school. So they can only use the excuse of comparing grades to save face a little bit. "Just now I said we were going to compete in grades, but you insisted on competing in fists and feet, ah. George shook his head, and the three little wizards looked even uglier, and they were obviously very regretful. The next day, early in the morning, while the three little wizards with bruised faces were still sleeping soundly, George, who had slept for 7 hours, opened his eyes on time. After a simple wash, he came to the common room. Because the class leader said yesterday when he left, the class schedule for this week would be posted in the common room after 6 in the morning. It is now 7:20, and the normal class time for little wizards is 9 o'clock, so most people have not gotten up yet. There are only a few senior wizards who study very hard in the common room reviewing their lessons, probably 5th-year wizards, because they will take the most important wizard OWL ordinary wizard level exam this year. Only one class today. After finding the posted class schedule, George discovered that today is the first day of school, and Slytherin first graders have a history of magic at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the rest of the time is free activities. But after reading it, it is not so easy every day. On Tuesday, there are 2 transfiguration classes in the morning and 1 defense against the dark arts class in the afternoon. On Wednesday, there are 2 herbology classes in the morning and a rest in the afternoon. On Thursday, there is a transfiguration class and defense against the dark arts class in the morning, a charms class in the afternoon, and a history of magic class in the evening. On Friday, there are 2 potions classes in the morning, 1 herbology class in the afternoon, and an astronomy class in the evening. In addition, it is marked that the flying class will start from the second week and will be held after the charms class on Thursday afternoon. In addition, the name of the college that will take the class together is marked on the schedule for each class. Because the teaching staff is limited and the number of students in one college is too small. So in Hogwarts, basically 2 colleges take a class at the same time, with more than 20 people in one classroom. For example, potions and flying classes are taken with the first-year students of Gryffindor. Charms and transfiguration classes are taken with Hufflepuff. Herbology, history of magic, defense against the dark arts and astronomy are all taken with Ravenclaw. At the same time, the classroom locations of each subject are also marked above. There are too few spells. After memorizing the entire curriculum, George couldn't help but frown. For him, the most important of all the courses is the spells class, because most of the magic principles and basic spells are taught in this class. But there is only 1 class per week on the schedule, just like the useless astronomy class. But after thinking about it, it makes sense. This is the first grade, and there are many children from Muggle families who know nothing about magic. They don't need to master so many spells in a hurry. It is more important to lay a good foundation. It seems that I still have to rely on myself. This intensity of course is too little for him. If he wants to master more magic, he still needs to spend more time on self-study. Fortunately, unlike Nocturne Alley, even if you study by yourself in Hogwarts, the efficiency is much higher. Because if you don't understand something, you can ask the teacher at any time, or go to the library to check the massive amount of free magic books. Since there is only class in the afternoon, I will take a good walk in the morning. George did not continue reading, but wandered around the entire Hogwarts castle. He will study here for the next 7 years. He must first check out every place, so that it will be convenient for him to do anything later. It is also a good opportunity to recognize the classrooms in advance. After leaving the Slytherin common room, he first walked through the entire dungeon. Don't underestimate the dungeon. The dungeon under Hogwarts Castle is very large and winding. It took him nearly an hour to walk around. The boathouse, the dungeon storage room, the room where ghosts often gather for the Death Day party, the potion classroom, the Slytherin Dean's office, the 5th Underground classroom, the Hogwarts kitchen and the Hufflepuff dormitory. The kitchen door was closed, and only the sound of the house elves making breakfast with magic could be heard. There were a lot of wooden barrels at the door of the Hufflepuff dormitory, which required specific knocks to enter, so he didn't go in to visit, but went up to the first-floor hall to have breakfast. George, long time no see. As soon as he reached the first floor, George heard a shout from above. He turned around and saw that it was Harry, Hermione and Ron coming down the marble stairs. Good morning, Harry, Hermione, and this one. Hello, my name is Ron. I heard Harry said that you helped him escape from Nocturne Alley last time. That's so cool. Ron's tone was a little excited. That was the famous Nocturne Alley, a place where his 2 twin brothers dreamed of exploring. You and Harry are not as cool as you, flying from London to school in a magic car, appearing in the Daily Prophet, and crashing the school's Whomping Willow." Hermione on the side sneered a little bit sarcastically. Ron's face suddenly stiffened when he heard this. "Okay, can you stop giving us lessons? We don't want that either." He discovered that Hermione was really a smaller version of Professor McGonagall sometimes. She always said she liked to tell them some great truths, but in fact sometimes she was braver than them. Harry took a step forward, avoiding the quarrel between Ron and Hermione, and asked George. "We didn't see the sorting ceremony yesterday. Which academy did you sort to?" "Slytherin." George took out the Slytherin symbol from his pocket that was distributed yesterday and had not yet been pinned to his chest. Harry immediately showed a look of regret when he saw this. "It would be nice if you could be in Gryffindor." In his heart, he was still somewhat prejudiced against Slytherin, especially since Slytherin had those annoying guys like Malfoy, and the dean was Snape, whom he hated the most. George smiled. "It doesn't matter which college you choose. As long as you go to Hogwarts, I'll be satisfied." "Good morning, George." At this time, another call came from above. This time it was Ginny, Colin and Luna coming down the marble stairs. "Do you know each other?" Harry and Ron were stunned when they saw Ginny greeting George. "Yesterday we sat in a box on the train, and George took good care of us." When Ginny saw Harry's presence, her voice immediately became much softer and her movements became more ladylike. "Thank you for looking after Ginny." Ron, who had changed his attitude when he heard that George was assigned to Slytherin, regained his opinion of George and even expressed his gratitude. Compared to Harry, he actually had a deeper prejudice against Slytherin. Before coming to Hogwarts, he once believed that all bad wizards came from Slytherin. "Well, could you please take a photo of me and Mr. Harry Potter?" Colin handed the camera to Ron and looked at Harry with bright eyes. "My name is Colin. I want to take a photo with you and send it to my dad to prove that I saw you. He is a milkman and there is no one in our family except me." Ron took the camera helplessly. When he first met Harry, he didn't behave much better than this one, which is understandable. After taking pictures, several people walked and chatted until they arrived at the auditorium. At this time, many little wizards were already having breakfast in the Great Hall, and the 4 long tables were piled with various foods prepared by the house elves, such as pumpkin porridge, pickled herring, bread, eggs, fresh meat, etc. Different houses rarely sit together for breakfast, so George went to the Slytherin table, Luna went to the Ravenclaw table, and Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny and Colin went to the Glenfindow long table. "First year, you seem to know Harry Potter and the others." As soon as George sat down, the blonde Malfoy took his 2 followers, Goyle and Crabbe, and sat opposite him. Because of Pansy's teasing yesterday, he had an impression of George. He just saw George chatting happily with Harry, whom he hated the most, and he suddenly felt unhappy. Called friends. George took a bowl of pumpkin porridge and a pile of fresh meat and replied casually. Being close to Harry would inevitably offend Malfoy, which he had known for a long time. In fact, even if he wasn't close to Harry, he would still offend Malfoy. Because he wants to become the best student in the entire Hogwarts and even join the Quidditch team, which will definitely steal Malfoy's limelight. But it doesn't matter. Little Malfoy is not his father, Big Malfoy, so he poses no threat to him. Friends. Slytherin and Gryffindor are enemies and can never become friends. You'd better stay away from them, otherwise I will teach you how to become a Slytherin wizard. Malfoy was obviously dissatisfied with George's attitude, and his tone was full of warning. George replied calmly, "I am free to make friends with whom I choose, you should take care of yourself. I heard that the first place in last year's final exam was Miss Hermione from Gryffindor. We, Slytherin, also lost to Gryffindor in the House Cup that we had maintained for 6 years. You guys are really useless." Quote. When he said the last sentence, he deliberately raised his voice so much that even the little wizards at other tables looked over. "What are you talking about? You actually called me trash. What qualifications do you, a half-blood, have to call me trash?" When Malfoy heard George's words, he went crazy and slapped the table hard, causing the mountain of bread on the table to collapse. George put down the spoon in his hand and looked up at Malfoy. "As far as I know, our Slytherin dean is also of mixed race. Are you discriminating against our dean? The dean of the hospital is naturally different from you. I'm just talking about you. Malfoy's tone immediately weakened. It is normal for purebloods to discriminate against half-bloods, but this kind of thing cannot be said openly, because there are many half-bloods in the senior grades of Slytherin, and the dean is also a half-blood. He was also confused just now. You are a small first-year student, but you are so arrogant. We Slytherins compete on strength, not eloquence. At this time, Pansy, who was sitting on the second-year side, came over. Although she teased Malfoy yesterday, it did not mean that she did not stand on Malfoy's side. The Malfoy family is a well-known family among pure bloods. In the future, she may marry Malfoy and make her family more prosperous. So when she saw Malfoy being humiliated, she naturally came up to help. This lady is right. The excellence of our Slytherins is based on strength, so I am not targeting him. I am saying that everyone here, your entire second year, is trash. George wiped his mouth gracefully and stood up, speaking loudly in a tone that stunned countless young wizards. If you weren't trash, how could you let the 6-year-old house cup end here? I, George, will put it here today. As long as I am here, the first place will always belong to us Slytherin, and I will win the house cup back from Gryffindor. But I am different from you trash. I will not be hostile to students from other houses because of this healthy competition. Competition is competition, and friends are friends, whether it is Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, or Hufflepuff. I will make friends that I should make. I will use my strength to win honor for Slytherin. This is the demeanor that we Slytherins should have. Putting down the tissue, and ignoring Malfoy and the others, George turned around and walked straight out of the Great Hall. Just as he was about to leave the Great Hall, thunderous applause broke out. Not only from the senior wizards of Slytherin, but also from the wizards of the other 3 colleges. Regardless of whether George had the ability or not, just the words he said in the Great Hall and his courage made many young wizards admire him. Because not everyone dared to say these words in public, and once they could not complete them later, it would become a complete joke. Even Malfoy did not dare to make such a boast, or it seems that no one has dared to do so since the opening of Hogwarts. Harry, to be honest, I was just impressed by his handsomeness. Although he is a Slytherin and said he wanted to steal our house cup, I didn't find him annoying. Especially, did you see Malfoy's face? Even when we won the house cup last year, he wasn't that ugly. At the Gryffindor table, Ron couldn't help but say to Harry. In terms of hating Malfoy, he actually hated him more than Harry, especially when his father and Malfoy's father had a fight in Diagon Alley before. And Harry nodded. George is different from Malfoy, but we can't lose the house cup either. Like George said, we are in healthy competition, and we work hard together. At this time, Hermione was no longer angry about Harry and Ron's dangerous behavior yesterday, and returned to her usual appearance. We will work hard. Ginny and Colin on the side looked at Harry expectantly at the same time, as if waiting for his reply. Harry encouraged helplessly. Come on, I think they can set up a Harry Potter fan club soon. Ron couldn't help but joke when he saw this. Compared to the joy on this side, Malfoy's face on the other side was gloomy and almost dripping with water. The louder the applause in the auditorium just now, the more swollen his face was. In fact, the senior Slytherin students have always been unhappy about the loss of the Quidditch game and the College Cup last year, but they didn't say much because of his family and status. Because before them, Slytherin had won for 6 consecutive years, which means that the 6 grades above Slytherin are stronger than the other 3 colleges. As a result, they all lost to Gryffindor last year, and the biggest reason was Hermione and Harry, who were in the same grade as him. As a representative of Slytherin in the same grade, he naturally had to take the blame. If he could surpass Hermione in grades and Harry in Quidditch, and earn more points, even if Harry and his friends got so many more points in the end, they would not lose. We must win the College Cup, but not by him, but by me, Malfoy. Don't worry, he's just a joke, time will prove that you are the hope of Slytherin. Although Pansy looked ugly, she was not worried at all. Because unless George is outstanding, even if his grades are really good, he will not live up to his words just now, and the ending has already been determined. There is no way, you bumped into it yourself. After leaving the Great Hall, George continued to explore the first floor. As a Slytherin, without the blessing of a family background, if you want to be famous and valued as quickly as possible, you must show your strengths and not hide your shortcomings. As for whether this will make Dumbledore think of Voldemort, it is not the case. He has not shown any signs of hating Muggle wizards, and he has generously admitted his friendship with Harry, Ron, Hermione and others. So Malfoy's picking faults can actually give him the opportunity to express his position and establish his personality, otherwise he really can't say it so openly. In fact, if it weren't for this, he could have ignored Malfoy's troublemaking, because the other party couldn't do anything to him anyway. In addition to the Great Hall and the waiting room for the sorting ceremony where he had been before, there are actually many rooms on the first floor. For example, the staff lounge specially prepared for the teachers of the college, the office of the administrator Filch, the transfiguration classroom and some other temporary classrooms. After visiting the first floor, he went to the second floor along the marble stairs. The second floor is mainly the history of magic classroom where he will take classes in the afternoon, the office of the Gryffindor Dean and the school infirmary. The school infirmary is managed by Poppy Pomfrey, who is good at healing magic. There is also a bathroom for girls. The most important defense against the dark arts professor's office and Moaning Myrtle's bathroom on the third floor are connected to the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets. George did not go in, but just looked at it from the outside. The fourth floor is the Charms classroom, defense against the dark arts classroom, trophy display room and armor corridor. There were many armors that had been awakened in the armor corridor. When he passed by, he was lucky enough to see 2 sets of armor fighting. The cause seemed to be that one set of armor sang too badly and the other set of armor could not stand it any longer. He was very interested in this kind of magic that could awaken the intelligence of dead things. If it was used in the mutant school in the future, it could also add a lot of defense to the school. There was another place on the 4th floor that was also very important, or to him, it should be the most important. That was the Hogwarts library, which was said to have tens of thousands of magic books and countless banned books that could not be bought outside. It was closed before 8 o'clock every night. The 5th floor was full of abandoned classrooms and a bathroom for both men and women. The 6th floor also has some abandoned classrooms and bathrooms for prefects. The 7th floor has some vacant offices and boys' bathrooms. The 8th floor has the office of the Ravenclaw headmaster, the entrance to the Gryffindor Tower, the entrance to the divination classroom in the North Tower, the entrance to the Ravenclaw Tower, the entrance to the West Tower, the entrance to the headmaster's office, and the Room of Requirement. George knew how to enter the Room of Requirement, but he didn't go in. In his opinion, the entire Hogwarts castle was probably under Dumbledore's surveillance, and it was hard not to be suspicious if he suddenly entered the Room of Requirement. The key point was that he didn't need the Room of Requirement now. He didn't plan to touch the Voldemort Horcrux hidden in the Room of Requirement for the time being. After visiting the castle, he walked around the castle again, including the greenhouse and garden dedicated to herbology, the flying broom class learning venue, and the Quidditch field. After all the inspections were completed, it was already noon. He did not go to Hagrid's hut and the Forbidden Forest, which were farther away, but returned to the Great Hall to eat. This time when he entered the Great Hall, he was obviously no longer a little transparent. Many young wizards secretly pointed at him, some admired him, some were jealous, some were disdainful, and some were full of malice waiting to see the joke. George didn't care about it. He also met Harry and others who came to eat after class. Hermione showed him the exquisite buttons she made from beetles in the transfiguration class. Ron was in a bad mood. Harry told him that it was because Ron received a yelling letter from his mother after he left in the morning. In the afternoon, George held the History of Magic textbook and started his first class at Hogwarts. History of Magic is taught by Slytherins and Ravenclaws, so soon after George entered the classroom, he saw Luna wearing homemade carrot-shaped earrings. It's just that maybe because of Luna's unusual behavior and way of speaking, no Ravenclaw students in the same grade are willing to sit with her, including her roommates. Similarly, George is sitting alone because of his speech in the morning. No one wants to sit with him before he is sure whether he is good or not, lest he becomes a joke. As for his 3 roommates, the swelling on their faces has not subsided yet, and they are even less likely to sit next to him. Don't worry about other people's opinions, just be ourselves. Seeing George sitting alone, Luna stood up and sat next to him, inserted her wand behind her ear, and comforted him in a very steady voice. And George smiled and nodded. Thanks. Although he didn't need comfort, Luna's actions still deserved this thank you. Speaking of which, although Luna is 1 grade younger than Harry and the others, in terms of psychological maturity, she is sometimes more mature than some adults. She has her own ideas and beliefs, and even if others think she is crazy, she doesn't care. She didn't get angry when facing those classmates who often made jokes and pranks, and always looked calm. To be honest, George felt that at Luna's age, he would never be able to reach her level. The bell rang, and Ghost Binns, the teacher of history of magic, walked through the blackboard wall and appeared on the podium. This is the only ghost teacher in Hogwarts. He was the history of magic professor at Hogwarts when he was alive. Because one day he stood up to go to class and accidentally left his body in an armchair in front of the fire in the staff room, thus turning into a ghost and continuing to teach the history of magic at Hogwarts. In the Middle Ages, non-magic people were particularly afraid of magic, but lacked sufficient understanding of magic. Occasionally, they caught a real witch or wizard, and burning them was of no use at all. The wizard only needs to cast the most basic fire-condensing spell, pretending to scream in pain while enjoying the numbing pleasure. Weird Gwendolyn liked the feeling of being burned so much that she deliberately disguised herself in various disguises and had her caught 47 times. There was no prelude or self-introduction. From the moment he stood on the podium, Professor Binns began to talk about the history of magic in his own breathy and drawl tone. As if casting hypnotic magic, some little wizards quickly fell asleep. After continuing to speak for half an hour, Professor Binns stopped for a moment, and then started to ask questions according to the rigid teaching rhythm. Can anyone tell me how many times Weird Gwendolyn was captured by Muggles? Although he asked the question, he didn't expect anyone to actually answer it. He knew very well what his class was like. So this is just a necessary part of class. If no one answers, he will continue talking until the end of get out of class. 47 times, Professor. However, just when he was about to skip this link and continue, a little wizard raised his hand and gave the answer. Very good, correct answer. Professor Binns was a little surprised, but he didn't think much about it and prepared to continue teaching. There are very few young wizards who can answer during his question session. The last time it was the Gryffindor student named Grant or Granny. But this is nothing in his thousands of years of teaching. Aren't you given any points? It seems like just answering the questions isn't enough. When George saw that Professor Binns did not give him a mark for his correct answer, he raised his eyebrows slightly. According to his understanding, Professor Binns is the only professor among all the professors who will not give points, not because he is mean, but mainly because he has a bad memory and cannot remember to give points. After becoming a ghost, apart from remembering various historical knowledge clearly, my memory in other aspects became very poor. So if you want to get points, just answering the questions correctly is not enough. Professor, I have a question. Since wizards can use various magics to defend themselves against Muggle attacks, why were so many wizards persecuted by Muggles back then? Because the way wizards learned magic was passed down from their parents, many wizards didn't actually master many magic spells. So when the 4 deans founded Hogwarts, they actually wanted more wizards to learn the magic to protect themselves, right? Yes, that's the reason. It seems you have some knowledge of the history of magic. It was only during this period that I memorized more than 40 magic books such as History of Magic, A History of Hogwarts, Important Magical Events of the 20th Century, Modern History of Magic, and Interpretation of Medieval Events. Are you sure you have memorized so many books on the history of magic? After hearing George's words, Professor Binns showed a rare expression of surprise. The other drowsy little wizards also woke up one after another, with gossipy looks on their faces. Then I want to test you. Next, Professor Binns began to ask questions about the time, location and general content of various events from the history of magic books that George mentioned. And George answered them all fluently without making any mistakes. Your name is George, right? That's great. The school hasn't had a student as interested in the history of magic as you for a long time. Your knowledge of the history of magic exceeds that of many 5th and 6th grade students. Quote. Professor Binns' prim face showed a smile full of relief. The reason why other ghosts turned into ghosts was because of the fear of death, but he was because of his obsession with teaching the history of magic. So nothing could make him happy to see a student so gifted and interested in the history of magic. I have always felt that the history of magic is a very important and worthy subject. Studying the history of magic allows us to use the experiences of the wizards and wizards in history for our own use and enlighten our wisdom. Not only will it help us learn magic and improve spells, but it will also help us find ways to get along with wizards and muggles. The winner can see the future from history and illuminate our wisdom for moving forward. Quote. George explained his views on history in a loud voice, and the little wizards in Slytherin and Ravenclaw next to him were all stunned. Although they didn't quite understand what George said, they felt that what he said seemed very powerful. Because at this time, Professor Binns' ghostly body actually started to tremble with excitement. Well said, I want to give you a reward. By the way, I can give you extra points. I forgot about it. George, you are great. I will give Slytherin 50 points. Quote. Oh, Professor Binns actually gave points to Merlin's beard. Didn't he say that he never gives points? Oh, Merlin's pants, George actually won 50 points for Slytherin in one go. It seems that what he said this morning was not a big lie. When the little wizards heard Professor Binns giving points, they immediately exploded. The history of magic is over, and George is no longer alone, but surrounded by little wizards. Did you really memorize so many magic books? Yes, my memory is pretty good. I heard you're going to win the House Cup for Slytherin. That's natural. On the way back, when faced with questions from the little Slytherin wizards of the same grade, George responded with ease, always showing confidence but not arrogance, and quickly got along with them. Even the 3 roommates who had been beaten by him before looked at him with a little more admiration. This is the case with Slytherin. As long as you are a Slytherin, as long as you are good enough and can win honor and benefits for them, then they will instinctively gather around you. As a first-year student, George scored an exaggerated 50 points for Slytherin in the first period of school, which was an honor for the entire first-year class. Of course, if George wants to truly become the leader of Slytherin, this achievement alone is far from enough. But this is at least a good start. The fact that he got 50 points for Slytherin from Mr. Binns in the History of Magic class was quickly known by most teachers and students in the school as the young wizard spread the word. In fact, it wouldn't be that fast normally, mainly because Professor Binns is famous for not giving points, and the enthusiasm of George's speech in the morning has not subsided, so they just collided. The advantage was that when he was sitting in the Slytherin common room reading at night, senior Slytherins would come over to say hello and get to know him from time to time. Even if Malfoy wanted to cause trouble for him, he was stopped by the prefect. The next day, both morning periods were transfiguration classes, with the first years of Hufflepuff. As soon as George entered the classroom, he was noticed by the little wizards of Hufflepuff. Apparently they also heard about George getting 50 points for Slytherin yesterday. However, they did not make any provocation. Most of the little wizards in Hufflepuff had good personalities and were just curious. Meow. Just as the transfiguration class was about to begin, a tabby cat walked in from the door, and then, amidst the exclamations of the young wizards, it transformed into Professor McGonagall in dark green robes. Animagus transformation. George's eyes couldn't help but gleam slightly when he saw McGonagall transforming from a cat into a human. This is a very profound transformation technique that can permanently transform into an animal. Although it cannot be a magical creature and can only be one kind, he still finds it very useful. Because no matter what kind of animal it is, as long as it is not too conspicuous, it is a very good disguise. This kind of disguise is very useful whether it is used to obtain intelligence or to escape and track. Imagine that you are being hunted by a large group of agents, and are being monitored by satellites. There are countless sniper rifles in the distance. There is no way to escape. But once you master the Animagus transformation, you can find a house and go into it, transform into an ordinary creature, hide and escape. If it's a cat, it might make people a little suspicious, but if it's flies, mosquitoes, 7-spotted ladybugs, etc., it's really unimpeded. Transfiguration is the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. If anyone is mischievous in my class, I will ask him out and never let him in again. I warned you. Quote. Professor McGonagall walked onto the podium, first gave a stern warning, then waved her wand and easily turned the podium into a pig, and then back again. When the students saw this, they were all attracted and wanted to start learning this magical magic right away. It was only after Teacher McGonagall gave a theoretical explanation that they realized how difficult it was to turn such a large lecture into a pig. Sure enough, famous teachers are different. After listening to a theoretical class, George was filled with emotions. Transfiguration was taken out as a separate subject from all magic spells, which shows that this subject is much more advanced than other magics. Although he himself has spent time and research, and has even memorized the entire textbook, History of Magic mainly relies on computers for cheating, there are still many things he does not understand. Even though he asked Tonks for advice several times, he still couldn't quite understand what Tonks was explaining. It's like you are learning a high-level math book. Even if you memorize the entire high-level math book, you may not be able to get many points on the test. As a top transfiguration master, Professor McGonagall has many years of teaching experience. Under her explanation, George's understanding of transfiguration suddenly made a breakthrough. 5 points for Slytherin. Before the end of the first class, there was naturally a question and answer session, and George did his part and scored 5 points. There is no way, two heads have a strong memory, not to mention that they are still taking notes on the computer, let alone serious knowledge points. Even Professor McGonagall's reprimands are written down verbatim. Moreover, Professor McGonagall is different from Professor Snape. He is very fair and treats students equally. He will not deliberately make things difficult and deny points to George just because he is a Slytherin. On the contrary, seeing that George answered perfectly and had some understanding of the transfiguration technique, there was a rare smile on his lips. The first theoretical section and the second section are naturally practical lessons. Professor McGonagall gave each of them a match and asked them to use a basic transfiguration spell to turn it into a needle. But this is obviously not easy for the little wizards. They chanted the spell over and over again, waved the wand over and over again, but the matchsticks were still matches. Only a few talented little wizards had some changes in their matches, but they were still a long way from turning into needles. Don't give up, practice more, think about the key points I taught you in the last class. The speed and rhythm of the spell, the angle of waving the wand, and the most important thing is your heart. You must firmly believe that you can turn it into a needle. Professor McGonagall walked back and forth in the classroom, constantly correcting some mistakes made by the little wizards in casting spells. But when she walked to George's position, she couldn't help but brighten her eyes. Slytherin, add 5 more points. Because she saw a perfect needle. Not only the needle head was very sharp, but even the threading space at the end of the needle was flawless. After hearing Professor McGonagall's extra points, the little wizards turned their eyes to Chao-Ji, and saw the perfect needle on his desk, and showed envy and admiration. At this time, George smiled and did not say anything shocking. In fact, after the first class, he has mastered one of the essentials of transfiguration, or should I say the essentials of most spells. That is the power of the mind, the power of belief. When learning a new spell, spells and wands are only auxiliary, otherwise no wizard can cast spells silently and without a wand. The most important thing is the mind, that is, spiritual power, which is the root of the completion of magic. It is said that the magic in the Harry Potter world is very idealistic, and it is not without reason. He just has a great advantage in this regard, because in addition to being a wizard, he also has the mental power of a second-level mutant. So after learning the theoretical knowledge from Professor McGonagall, he successfully turned the match into a needle without a few experiments. The key is that he feels that with his mental power, it may not be just that. Maybe he can't turn the podium into a pig, but something bigger, like transforming something the size of a fist, should be possible now. After the transfiguration class, he did not go directly to eat. Instead, he chased Professor McGonagall and asked questions about transfiguration for a full hour before leaving with unfinished content. You must know that every professor has to teach several grades and is very busy. If he doesn't find the right time to ask more questions, he may not be able to find it. Afternoon, Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Gilderoy Lockhart, wearing a lavender robe, walked into the classroom coquettishly and stood on the podium. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin 3rd Class, honorary member of the Defense League Against the Dark Arts, 5-time winner of Wizarding Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award, but I don't talk about that, I'm not use your smile to drive away all the female ghosts. What he thought was a humorous opening statement made the boys in the classroom look at each other a little bit, but the girls liked it very much and clapped their hands excitedly. This guy looks pretty good. Looking at the wizard above who had obtained a series of honors through deception, George had to admit that the reason why he became popular in the wizarding world and was sought after by witches of different ages was not just because of his good writing. What's more important is his handsome appearance and shameless character. But even though this guy doesn't have much real material, he still has a lot of uses for him. Anyway, he concluded that Lockhart had 3 good qualities. First, the credits are good. As long as you meet his appetite, unlike other professors who worry as much, the credits will be given easily. Second, he has good rights. Only professors can issue notes asking students to go to the restricted book area to get books. If they build a good relationship, they can get notes from Lockhart to go to the restricted book area. Third, the forgetting curse is good. This guy's other spells are a mess, but he is as good as a top wizard in the forgetting curse. If he can learn the forgetting curse from Lockhart, it will be of great help to him in the Marvel world. So he didn't intend to mess up this class. I see you all bought my complete set, which is great. Then let's take a little test today. Don't be afraid, just see how well you read and how much you understand. After Lockhart introduced himself, he took out a stack of papers and distributed them to the young wizards in the classroom one by one. I'll give you 30 minutes, now start. George picked up the paper and saw that it was filled with questions about Lockhart himself, and asked Marvel to quickly open the computer and check it out. After Lockhart became the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, he replaced all the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbooks from grades 1 to 7 with 7 of his own books. So George naturally bought it, and he also bought the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook that was used by the first grade in previous years, Dark Arts, A Guide to Self-Defense. He has actually read all 7 of Lockhart's books. After all, aside from the boastful content, many magical experiences are the real experiences of some powerful wizards. It's just that those experiences were plagiarized by Lockhart, and then he used the forgetting spell that he was good at to make those wizards forget. Half an hour later, Lockhart put the papers away and started reading and commenting directly on the podium. Most of the questions on the paper were not answered correctly, and even the little witches who liked him could only answer half of them correctly until he turned to George's paper. "Oh, who is this?" "George, I know you. Yesterday morning, you said you would bring back the house cup for Slytherin. It's very good. You are really good. Not only does he know my favorite color, but he also knows what I want most for my birthday and my great and noble ambitions. You actually answered all my questions correctly, 20 points, plus 20 points for Slytherin." Quote. While marking George's paper, the smile on Lockhart's face never faded. In the Defense Against the Dark Arts class he had taken these past 2 days, except for a second-year Gryffindor girl named Hermione, who got most of the answers correct, few of the others got more than half. But now, there is actually a student who answered all the questions correctly. He is also a famous Slytherin freshman in the past 2 days. How can this not make his vanity burst? "Professor, I think your book contains a lot of magical experiences worth studying in depth, so I have read it many times and it has been deeply imprinted in my mind." George raised his hand and said, and this sentence obviously won Lockhart's heart. He came to George with great satisfaction and laughed. "Don't worry, as long as you work hard, with your magic talent that is almost close to mine, you will definitely be as successful as me one day in the future. I am very optimistic about you. Even if I succeed, I have to thank the professor for his guidance. I have always been a grateful person." A meaningful smile appeared on George's face, and Lockhart's eyes suddenly lit up, and the look he looked at George became more and more kind. "Okay, let's start reading my book, Walking with Ghouls. This book has a lot of introductions about ghouls. I will ask random questions and give points for correct answers." Just like that, when the Defense Against the Dark Arts class ended, George got 10 points for Slytherin again. So far, in just 2 days, he has already scored a full 90 points for Slytherin, allowing Slytherin to be far ahead from the start. Likewise, he didn't let Lockhart go after class. "Professor, I have some questions about magic that I would like to ask you." "No problem. Since we are the same kind of people, I can spare my precious time after class to give you a small lesson." Lockhart did not refuse, but winked at George. From George's actions yesterday morning and his current performance, he keenly realized that he was the same as himself, the kind of person obsessed with fame. But he didn't hate George, because George had already shown that he would benefit from him. The more famous George became, the more famous Lockhart became. More importantly, he relied on deception, and this George was obviously really gifted. Such potential stocks, like Harry, can be won over by his side in advance. Professor, I am interested in the Oblivion spell. I wonder if you can. Seeing that Lockhart agreed, George didn't hesitate and went straight to the point. Lockhart was a little guilty and was planning to fool George, but when he heard that he was asking for advice on the Oblivion charm, the only spell he was good at, he immediately raised his chest and replied nonchalantly. It's just the Oblivion charm, which is the spell I'm least good at, but it's still a little better than the guys in the Ministry of Magic's Memory Deletion Command. The Ministry of Magic's Memory Deletion Command is affiliated with the Ministry of Magic's Magical Accidents and Disasters Department. Its main work is to use the Oblivion charm to erase the memories of Muggles who have seen the existence of magic, and to use the Repair charm to repair buildings damaged by magic battles. Therefore, the wizards in this department are among the best Oblivion charm and Repair charm masters in the wizarding world. Wednesday morning, Herbal Medicine class. Not surprisingly, George once again scored 10 points for Slytherin. Originally, this body had a lot of knowledge about herbs and potions because he had been selling potions with the old wizard for many years. Coupled with the computer assistance of the body, the first-year problems were not difficult for him at all. In the afternoon, George left the castle alone and walked along a path leading to the Forbidden Forest towards Hagrid's hut. It's early July, the most comfortable time when it's neither too cold nor too hot. The path outside the castle is filled with all kinds of wild flowers, and the green grass stretches all the way to the Black Lake. If you walk a few more steps along the grass toward the Black Lake, you may find a few couples of senior wizards in love on the slopes. Foreign children are already precocious, and Hogwarts wizards are even precocious. Many of them start falling in love in the 2nd and 3rd grade. Those like Ron and Harry, who only start to blossom in 4 or 5 years, are in the minority. Without disturbing the little mandarin ducks, they walked all the way through the Quidditch pitch and across a long stone bridge. Finally, at the edge of an endless forest, he saw a wooden house that was enlarged 2 or 3 times, and large pumpkins planted in front of the wooden house. Wong wong wong. As soon as he reached the door of the cabin, a big black dog suddenly jumped out from the side and barked demonstratively at him. George stared at the big black dog with his eyes and activated his psychic ability. The big black dog was stunned for a moment, and then wagged its tail. Yeah, stop. At this time, the door of the wooden house was pushed open, and Hagrid revealed his huge body. It's you, little boss, welcome here. I just made some rock biscuits. You can eat some with this kid. That would be an honor. There was a surprised look on George's face. He didn't expect that apart from him, Hagrid would have other guests here today. Ginny, why are you here? Don't you have classes in the afternoon? Entering the cabin, he saw Ginny sitting on a stool taller than him. As far as he knew, Gryffindor only had Friday afternoon off from classes, and today was Wednesday. George, you're right, I'm going to get ready for class. Ginny jumped down from the stool in a panic and hurriedly ran out of the cabin. Hagrid put the rock cake he had just made on the table and said with a smile. The little girl wanted to ask me when Harry would usually come over, but you scared me away. Then you can solve her problem together. Well, the rock biscuits smell so good. It's a pity that I just finished lunch in the auditorium before coming here. It's such a pity. George touched his bulging belly and pushed back the rock cake in front of him with regret on his face. Hagrid's rock biscuits were made to fit his own teeth. They were so hard they could be used as bricks, and he didn't want to knock out his teeth. Seeing that George's belly was indeed quite round, and he had obviously eaten a lot of food, Hagrid also showed a regretful look. He picked up the rock cake and finished it in 3 or 2 bites. Wait for next time. Be sure to save your stomach next time you come over. Hagrid, I am very interested in magical animals and have read some books on this subject. I have a few questions to ask you. George twitched his mouth, and then stated the purpose of this visit. He can use his psychic abilities to communicate with magical animals, which does not mean that he can definitely tame magical animals for his own use, but it just has a greater advantage than ordinary wizards. Just like the magical zoologist Newt Scamander, it is said that he is also born with the ability to communicate with magical animals. But Newt was able to conquer so many powerful magical animals, mainly because he knew enough about the habits of magical animals and could prescribe the right medicine. It's great that you are interested in magical animals. I can tell you everything I know. Hagrid has a simple character. When he heard that George had the same interests as him, he immediately started talking non-stop. George was listening here, and the main body was taking notes simultaneously on the other side. On the one hand, learning about magical animals is to tame powerful magical animals for one's own use, and on the other hand, it also values the resources of the Forbidden Forest. Many precious magical animals are full of treasures and are essential materials for making magic items and potions. There are many of these precious magical animals in the Forbidden Forest. For example, the poison of the acromantula is worth 100 gold galleons per pint. There are at least 100 acromantulas in the Forbidden Forest. When it comes to making money, the potion master, who claims to be the most profitable, actually doesn't make as much money as the master of magical beasts. It's just that most masters of magical animals love and care for magical animals and do not deliberately use magical animals to make money. Moreover, it is not easy to become a master of magical animals. Without certain strength, it is easy to be eaten by magical animals. Newt was born with the ability to communicate with magical animals, and Hagrid was half giant. In fact, it's not just about money, because sometimes you can get things that you can't buy with money, but you can get them with rare magical animals. It also symbolizes an important exchange resource. On Thursday, there is transfiguration and defense against the dark arts in the morning, charms in the afternoon, and a history of magic class in the evening. George scored another 40 extra points for Slytherin, making Slytherin's score unparalleled, far behind the other 3 houses, and proved with his strength that what he said that morning was not a big lie. Because of this, he gradually gained the reputation of Slytherin star in the school, a rising star in Slytherin. In fact, Slytherin is not weak in overall scores every year, and with Snape's favoritism, it can win the House Cup every year. It's just that last year, Hermione, the academic bully, came and scored heavily. Even with Harry and Ron dragging down and Snape deducting points, the gap was not too big in the end, allowing Dumbledore to successfully counterattack with the Philosopher's Stone incident. And this year, George was able to score better than Hermione, not only in other subjects, but also in history of magic, without Snape's deduction. Even if Dumbledore was partial to him, a difference of 100 or 200 points was acceptable, but it would be difficult to make up for a difference of several hundred points. The Dean of Slytherin, Professor Snape, had the same idea as him. Does anyone know what ingredients are needed for the potion to treat boils? George, can you answer it? In the potions class on Friday morning, when George stood up to answer the question for the 5th time, he felt a little embarrassed. It's narcissus root powder, aconitum naviculatum and porcupine quills, Professor. It seems that not everyone is stupid. 5 points for Slytherin. Snape glanced at the whole classroom. Except for George, all the other little wizards lowered their heads. Next, let's try to make this potion. I hope you can be less stupid. While making the potion step by step according to the steps, George couldn't help but sigh that Snape was indeed completely different from Professor McGonagall. In fact, the questions Snape asked just now were a little beyond the scope. Except for George, who could look up the herbal and magic potion textbooks at any time, it was difficult for other little wizards to answer them. You say he is partial, and it is true that only George can raise his hand to answer. If you get serious, even Dumbledore can't say anything. But George is sure that Snape just wants him to brush up his score, otherwise he wouldn't ask 5 questions in one class. Next time he makes the potion, he will probably give him points. Sure enough, when he made the potion first, Snape came to his side like a big bat. An excellent potion. 5 points for Slytherin. During the weekend, George spent most of his time practicing the new spells he had learned. He occasionally took time to find Hagrid to learn some knowledge about magical animals and communicate with the magical animals raised by Hagrid. During this period, he did not see Harry and Ron. It was said that they were being punished for driving and crashing the Whomping Willow. In the second week, he was still madly brushing points while absorbing as much magical knowledge as possible, learning and practicing new magic. On the Marvel side, after more than 10 days of investigation, some clues gradually emerged. That evening, George rode a modified motorcycle from the mutant school in the suburbs to the Bronx near the city. On the way, when he encountered a test, he showed his expensive fake ID to get through. In these 10 days of investigation, in addition to roughly understanding the situation of dozens of large and small families in the Bronx, he also paid a high price to find a local fake ID to make him a fake identity. Of course, this fake identity can only fool ordinary policemen at ordinary times. If you encounter the CIA, SHIELD and the National Bureau of Investigation, you will definitely not be able to fool them. Not to mention using this identity to open an account, deposit the money into it, and then use it to buy Stark's shares. So he didn't plan to buy Stark's shares himself from the beginning. His body was a product of the laboratory, and he didn't have any identity proof at all. He couldn't get away with it with a fake certificate. He wanted to find an agent, but he couldn't just find one casually. First of all, this person must have a certain status, otherwise helping him buy Stark's shares may be suspected and attract the attention of various organizations. In fact, he felt that even if he robbed the gangs in the entire Bronx and used all the cash to buy Stark Group's shares, it would be a drop in the bucket for the giant Stark Group. After all, what he could rob was some cash, and at most he could force the bosses to withdraw the liquid funds in their accounts, but it was impossible to take away all the assets of the gangs. Maybe this cash is already an astronomical figure for the poorest and most chaotic Bronx, but for the Stark Group, it may not be as valuable as the artworks in Tony Stark's mansion. The money of the truly rich is unimaginable to the poor. A painting in Tony Stark's room may be worth hundreds of millions, but for him, hundreds of millions are actually enough for him to lead those mutant children to a stable life. He doesn't need to do anything big now, and he doesn't need to go against major organizations. He just needs a stable life to study magic and improve his strength. If he wasn't worried about the invasion of the Chitauri in a few years, if the Avengers failed to resist and the entire Earth fell, he wouldn't stay near New York. Secondly, the agent must have a concern for the Bronx and cannot leave here. Otherwise, if so much money is left to the other party to manage, the other party will run away with the money. Where can he find it? People die for money and birds die for food. He doesn't believe that people will be loyal to him after just a few months of getting along. He doesn't have that kind of kingly spirit. Fortunately, these 10 days are not in vain. He has gradually come up with a goal that may be feasible. Today is just the right time to watch a good show. If everything goes well, then the agent can be confirmed. After parking the motorcycle, he found an empty alley, wrapped himself in a black robe, put on the most common mask that can be bought on the roadside, and used his full power. His special shoes with iron plates immediately lifted him up and slowly floated up above the alley. After such a period of development, especially under the influence of wizard blood, his control of magnetic force has also made great progress, and he can barely control objects weighing more than 100 kilograms. It has exceeded the evaluation standard of the laboratory base for his potential limit. If he meets X-24 now, he can play with him with his ability. More than 100 kilograms can make X-24, who is covered with adamantium alloy, walk unsteadily. So when he used his full power, he could barely make the special shoes inlaid with iron plates carry him up. Of course, as for speed, it can only be said that it is not as fast as walking. If it is a battle, it is a living target. But in certain specific places, it is still very useful. For example, now, he can easily go to the roof, move over the roof to avoid various surveillance and sight, sneak into some tightly sealed venues very easily, and it is not easy to be tracked. On the roof of the 7th floor of the strip club controlled by the Chebel family, an old man in his 70s sat in a wheelchair, looking at the middle-aged man who was beaten to death in front of him, and said with some regret, "Leon, you were really good, I am really optimistic about you, and I have always treated you as my godson. It's a pity that you must die here today. Mr. Chebel, I really didn't betray you. I was wrong. I have always treated you as a father. How could I betray you? You have to believe me." The middle-aged man struggled to get up with blood on his face, trying his best to prove his loyalty. He was originally the child of a drug addict. His mother secretly left when he was young because she couldn't stand this hopeless life. When he was 13 years old, he accidentally saved Mr. Chebel, who was hunted by a hostile family. Since then, he was appreciated by Mr. Cheble and joined the Cheble family, living his dream life. For 30 years, he relied on his intelligence and wisdom to help the Cheble family develop from a small family to one of the 13 families in the Bronx. However, he was executed as the mastermind who wanted to seize the dominance of the Cheble family for just one assassination, which was really unacceptable. He has a beautiful and loving wife, many brothers who have been through life and death with him, and a lovely newborn daughter. He has dedicated most of his life to this family. I know you didn't betray me. The assassination was originally a play directed and acted by me. Otherwise, with your current status and reputation in the family, I really can't just execute you like this. Cheble sighed with a complicated look in his eyes. Hearing what Cheble said, Leon suddenly widened his eyes and murmured in disbelief. Why did you do this? I had no choice. I'm old. The doctor said that with my wounded body, I only have 2 years to live at most. But my son has just turned 20 and has just taken over the family affairs. His ability and reputation are not mature yet. Cheble coughed and looked at Leon with some sadness. He was not without feelings for Leon, but no matter how capable Leon was and how mediocre his son was, he would never let Leon replace his son. You are worried that I will replace the young master in the future, but you should understand my loyalty to you. I would never do that. Leon sat on the ground, as if all his strength was drained. Cheble pushed the wheelchair forward and shook his head. Leon, I believe in your character, but not your subordinates. Sometimes, you can't sit in my position if you don't want to. Your subordinates will push you to sit up. My last request is that for the sake of the many things I have done for the family, please spare the lives of my wife and daughter so that my brothers can continue to serve the family. After helping the family for so many years, Leon also knew that the situation mentioned by Cheble was not impossible. Because his men had always hoped that he could become the head of the Cheble family, and had repeatedly persuaded him to change the Cheble family to the Leon family. So at this moment, he no longer complained about anything, but just knelt in front of Cheble and lowered his head and begged. However, Cheble shook his head cruelly again. Leon, I once heard a sentence from a Chinese guy the first killed, and I always thought this sentence made sense. It's called, cutting weeds without eradicating the roots, they grow again when the spring breeze blows. If my son wants to successfully inherit the industry that I have worked hard for, there must be no potential threat. You have to understand a father's good intentions. Quote, I'm going to kill you. Leon used all his strength and suddenly jumped towards Cheble. He was kicked away by the strong man next to Cheble just in the middle of the lunge. If he was not so weak normally, now he was already covered in wounds. Leon, stop struggling, go in peace, I will personally take people to deal with your wife and daughter. Maybe you and them will meet again in heaven. Oh no, people like us will definitely go to hell after death, so we may not be able to meet again. Quote, the strong man stepped forward and trampled Leon under his feet, pulled out a pistol and pointed it at his head with a grin on his face. Leon lay on the ground and roared angrily. Cheble, I really regret not listening to my brothers. If there really is a hell, I will definitely climb out of it and take you and your son down with me. If there are demons in hell, I am willing to use my soul in exchange to break out of hell and take revenge. Quote, it's a pity that there is no hell or demon in this world, otherwise I would have died countless times, after all, my hands are stained with so much blood. The reality is so cruel. Only people like me can enjoy glory and wealth, and my children will inherit my glory and wealth. Quote, Cheble didn't care at all about Leon's curse. He had heard too many such words. However, at this moment, an interesting voice suddenly came from above the water tank on the roof. I'm not a devil, and I don't want your soul, but if you are willing to cooperate with me, then I am willing to fulfill your wish. Everyone turned to look at the top of the water tank. At some point, a mysterious man wearing a death mask and a robe stood there. Where did this guy come from? Kill him. Cheble narrowed his eyes and immediately ordered. The dozen or so men guarding him immediately drew out their pistols skillfully and pointed them at the mysterious man, preparing to kill him on the spot. However, at the moment when they were aiming, their pistols suddenly separated from their hands, as if controlled by an invisible force, floating in the air between their eyebrows, and the bullets were automatically loaded. I advise you not to move, otherwise I cannot guarantee that the gun will go off. George walked down from the top of the water tank step by step as if stepping on air, and then came to Leon, who was lying on the ground unable to get up, and looked at him condescendingly. Your answer? Yes, this Leon is currently an agent that he thinks is pretty good. Once he helps Leon take over the Chebble family, Leon will become one of the most powerful people in the underground world of the Bronx, and he is fully qualified to buy Stark stock without being suspected. And if he cleans up the other 12 families, Leon can also annex them openly. When Leon has such a large territory, he will not be able to run away with his wife and daughter, and they can cooperate for a long time. In the later stage, he helped to find out the information, and it also helped a lot in dealing with the pursuit of Yakkel's company. He had always felt that what Professor X had done was unwise. Why did he separate the mutants from humans and give them a new name? This is not to make the entire human race uncomfortable. Anyway, the term mutants has been forgotten by humans now, so forget it completely. They are humans with some special abilities. Naturally, they can also cooperate with humans to deal with those evil scientists and terrorists. Leon looked at the incredible scene on the top of the building and was stunned for 2 seconds, then replied with firm eyes. As long as you can save my family and brothers, then my life is yours. I don't want your life, I just need you to do something for me in the future. George snapped his fingers, and all the suspended pistols fired at the same time. Chelb's men fell to the rooftop without any resistance. Sir, whatever you need to do, I can do it for you. You don't need to cooperate with a loser. Chebble, the only survivor, saw that all his men were killed, and he suddenly broke out in a cold sweat while sitting in his wheelchair. He tries to convince George to let him go. However, George smiled and shook his head. No, you're too old. Letting someone like Chebble serve as an agent may be useless in 2 or 3 years. It would be too troublesome to find someone again by then, and his character is not as guaranteed as Leon's. Leave it to you to solve it yourself. The thin blade flew out of George's pocket and easily cut the rope binding Leon's hands. Leon stood up, picked up the pistol of the fallen man, came to Chebier, and shot him away without saying a word of mercy. Thank you, what should I call you? Looking at Chebble lying in a pool of blood, Leon was silent for 5 seconds, then turned around and thanked George sincerely. If it weren't for George's help, he would have died today, and his wife, daughter, and those brothers who had been through life and death together would definitely not have survived. So his thanks were also from the heart. No need to thank me, I saved you for my own purpose, we are in a cooperative relationship. You can call me by my code name, Death. George touched the mask on his face and waved his hand. Farmers and snakes, repaying kindness with hatred, this kind of thing is not uncommon. He doesn't think that if he saves the other party once, the other party will be loyal to him wholeheartedly. Besides, the other party's growth environment and experience are not likely to be good people. What do you need me to do? Leon is a smart man, he understands what George wants to express. In fact, George's magical method just now, and this outfit that hides his identity, he is not without doubts in his heart. Not now, I will come to you when I need you. George pointed to the iron gate at the rooftop entrance. Your boss's people should react soon, we have to leave here first. Already here, Leon's expression changed, he heard a lot of footsteps coming from the rooftop stairs. At this time, his physical condition was very poor, even if he had a gun in his hand, it was impossible to deal with so many people. So he could only turn his head and look at George. Now only George, who has magical powers, can save him. Naturally, George heard the footsteps. He hesitated for a moment, walked directly to the entrance of the rooftop, reached out to close the rooftop iron door, and started casting a spell on the handle. Flavi. The transformation spell was activated, and a fist-sized lock successfully transformed, locking the iron door firmly. Naturally, he is not afraid of the ordinary people below, but if too many people are killed, they will inevitably leave traces when the time comes. Let's go. After locking the iron door and temporarily blocking the rooftop to stop those who wanted to go up to the rooftop, George cast a levitating spell on Leon. Wingardium Leviosa. Leon saw George's hands constantly changing strange gestures, and then pointed at himself. His body actually floated like a balloon, and his heart was extremely shocked. This was the first time he had experienced such a magical thing, and his awe for George became even greater. Reaching out to grab the floating Leon's shoulders, George jumped from the rooftop of the 6th floor. At the same time, he activated his abilities and landed steadily in the dark alley. The levitation spell was one of the basic spells in the 1st grade, and it was also the spell he focused on learning and researching during this period. Although he cannot make himself fly, he can cooperate with his magnetism to move larger objects. It is also a good control skill against the enemy, especially against the X-24 type. A levitation spell reduces the weight of the X-24, and magnets allow it to be manipulated as a toy. Do you still need my help later? You've helped me enough, I can handle it myself. Leon gritted his teeth and replied. Chabir is dead. With his reputation and influence, it is not difficult to turn the Chabir family into the Leon family if you want. As for Chebal's son, he is just a loser who only knows how to eat, drink and have fun. Mainly, he doesn't want to owe this mysterious person any more favors, because he knows that these have to be repaid, and until now, he still doesn't know what the other party wants him to do. Then get rid of the Chebal family as soon as possible. Don't look for me. I will naturally come to you if necessary. George nodded, then slowly rose and disappeared into the night sky. After helping so much, if Leon still dies, then this kind of waste is not suitable to be his agent. On the other side, the clones in the Harry Potter world also had an opportunity to get closer to Snape, which was the first flying lesson after the charms class on Thursday afternoon of the 2nd week. As the master in the school second only to Dumbledore, Snape's self-created Divine Edge Shadowless Curse can be called the magic version of the 6-medium sword. Once hit by the Divine Edge Shadowless Curse, it cannot be cured by normal healing magic because of the cursed nature of black magic. He was the professor who he felt most needed to have a good relationship with, especially since he was in Slytherin house. So in addition to usually scoring points for Slytherin to win the Academy Cup, helping the Slytherin Quidditch team win is also one of the things he has to do. Quidditch, as Wizard's favorite sport, can also help him improve his reputation among students. The only drawback might be that it would waste his time learning spells. But after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not a waste. Using a broomstick to practice flying would allow him to better adapt to flying in the future. Flying was a skill that he must master. Although apparition is good, it will be interfered by magic such as anti-apparition. Under special circumstances, flying is more convenient. As for why he is so confident in his Quidditch skills, he had never touched a flying broomstick before, so he was not sure whether this body had any talent in this area. But it doesn't matter, his physical strength already has certain advantages, and more importantly, he has a trump card that he has prepared long ago. First-year Slytherins take flying lessons with Gryffindor. At 3:30 in the afternoon, the young wizards from the 2 colleges had already gathered on the lawn outside the castle. Among them, those children born into wizard families were excitedly talking about their thrilling experiences riding broomsticks. Most of them are just bragging stories, about competing in speed with an eagle, flying across the sea to France, almost hitting a Muggle plane, etc. George, I'm not as good as you in other subjects, but I won't let you score any more points in flying class. At this time, Ginny walked up to George with Colin, patting her chest with confidence on her face. George smiled when he saw this. I've never ridden a broomstick before, so I'm afraid I won't get any points. Regarding broomsticks, Ginny definitely has a talent that is no less than Harry's. Moreover, when she was 6 years old, Ginny broke into the broom shed at home while her brothers were not paying attention and secretly rode their broomsticks. She had never been discovered. However, I am afraid that Ginny will be disappointed this time. Okay, kids, stand in 2 rows now and I'll hand out broomsticks to you. At this time, Ms. Huochi, the teacher in charge of flying lessons, came over dragging more than 20 old broomsticks. It's so broken. After getting his own broomstick and looking at some branches poking out in random directions, George couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. The history of these broomsticks can be traced back to the Sidesweep series decades ago, and their speed and performance are far inferior to today's Nimbus series. Put your brooms on the ground first, and then learn from me the spell to control them. Remember, the key lies in your beliefs. Don't be afraid, the less confident you are, the less they will respond to you. Ms. Hooch first spent half an hour instructing the young wizards on how to correctly use the spells and techniques of the flying broom, and then entered the practical stage. Now, stretch out your right hand, place it on the broom handle, and start chanting the spell. The young wizard did as he was told. For those young wizards who had experience using flying brooms, the brooms flew into their hands immediately. And for those young wizards who saw flying brooms for the first time, there were all kinds of problems. Some flying brooms rolled on the ground and couldn't get up, and some staggered in the air and fell down. What's worse, some just lay there motionless, obviously they didn't chant the spell correctly. It doesn't seem to be very difficult. George stretched out his hand, and the flying broom appeared in his hand instantly, which surprised him a little. He guessed that it was probably not because of the high talent of this body itself, but because his mental ability greatly improved his mental strength, giving him a certain advantage in this regard. In fact, not only the flying broom, but also because of his strong mental power when learning other magic, he was also very efficient. Sometimes he couldn't help thinking that his secondary psychic ability already had such a good bonus. If Professor X had wizard blood, how terrible would the efficiency of learning magic be? Then think about it, if it was Phoenix Lady Jean, it didn't seem necessary, because her Phoenix Force was one of the most terrifying powers. Okay, next, let's try to fly. When I whistle, you kick your legs and leave the ground. Push hard. Seeing that everyone had grabbed the flying broom in their hands after a try, Mshooch entered the last stage of teaching. At this time, George also controlled a hair-thin wire to come out of his sleeve and entangled it on the flying broom. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.